ready? Good evening. I'd like to call the June 21st, 2022 meeting of the University Heights
Mr. King.
Here.
Is there a motion to excuse Mr. Rock?
So moved.
Aye. Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Next item is the reading and disposing of the journal. With regard to the minutes of June 7, 2022, is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, motion to adopt by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Blankfeld. Any discussion?
I had a question.
Mrs. Sachs?
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Mayor Brennan. So I had I think I sent a slight email to you with a slight adjustment for the end of the minutes.
And did you send that?
Today.
Today, okay, I didn't see it yet, so I can't
Okay.
incorporate that in. So
Should
do you
we,
want to do as amended, or?
Okay,
yeah, I mean,
that's fine.
it'd be nice to know what the amendment is, but
I can elaborate.
you
During
give us
my
the gist of it?
report,
okay.
there was a sentence that described it, and I had requested for there to be just the verbatim question and the verbatim answer, so that the record accurately reflects what was the communication that was exchanged. That's all. Okay.
Well, I think we might want to see that. I think we might want to see,
Sure, it would be
That-
from the recording, so it would be verbatim.
I see.
It's not an interpretation.
Move to table, Mayor?
Yes.
Okay,
Withdraw the motion?
So I'll withdraw my motion.
okay. Yeah, if you'll.
Sorry, I didn't hear that there was a motion.
No, there was a motion approved by
apologies.
Mrs. Weiss. If,
So I'll withdraw my motion to table.
okay, so that now is a motion to table by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Blankfeld. Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, very good. The minutes are tabled. Next is additions and removals from the agenda. Referrals to committee. I think there'll be some motions here. Who wants to start?
I'll make a motion to table item K.
Okay, there's a motion to table item K, which is ordinance 2022-31 by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Weiss. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Is there another motion?
Motion to table item L.
Okay, motion to table item L by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Weiss. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Item L is now tabled.
Mayor, I'll make a motion to read items M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, and T together.
Okay, there's a motion by Mr. Gould that we will read items M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, and T together. And that would be in the regular course of that portion of the agenda.
Yes, sir.
Very good. That's by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Blankfeld. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mr. McConville, did you
Oh,
want to
yes.
discuss
Mr.
at this
McConville,
point
did you
the
want to-
relevance of that?
Yes. Council members, as you may be aware, for the benefit of the public, items M through T are ordinances that were taken up through the Building and Housing Committee and seek to correct references within those various code chapters to the Building, Engineering, and Inspection Department and to the Department of Housing and Community Development, and the Housing Director. The changes are rote in nature and essentially either correct references to the building department or add in references to the housing department so that both departments have the powers enumerated throughout the code sections.
Okay, very good. Thank you for the explanation, Mr. McConville. Are there any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll on the motion.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankenfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Are there any other additions or removals from the agenda or referrals to committee?
I think we had one additional.
Amendment.
Do you want me to make that motion?
No, please, yeah.
If council will entertain a motion to amend item Q, ordinance 2020-38, so that it reads 2020-38, amending codified ordinance chapter 1456, entitled Moving of Building and Structures, and declaring an emergency. Is there a motion?
Luke, I just wanted to make sure, because both Q and P were the same. In the packet, it is P that you wanted to amend, not Q? Or Q you wanted to amend,
Q.
not P?
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
sure.
And that's moving of building and structures, or buildings and structures?
I believe it's building. Yes, moving of building and structures.
Okay, moving of building and structures. So the law director suggested a motion. Did we have somebody make that motion then? Was that you, Mr. Gould?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second by Mrs. Blankfeld. Any discussion on amending item Q? Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll on the amendment.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankenfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, so amended. Thank you.
Mayor,
Yes, Mrs.
I have a
Blankfeld.
question for our law director.
Sure.
Since items S, T, U, V, W were also before the building and housing in that entire group that have been explored, can we add that? Or do we have to make another motion to also add those to that consent agenda?
So we're considering items M through T together.
Okay.
And then U, V, and W, I'm carving out because each has a substantive change, which when we get there, I'll let you know. The U, V, and W also have the same rote changes that I mentioned earlier, but they include substantive changes as well that I'll
Okay.
explain.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Are there any further items for additions, removals from the agenda and referrals to committee? I think that covered all the ones I was aware of and anticipated. Okay, if there are none further, we now go to comments from the audience. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes. You should state your name and address for the record if you choose to address the city this evening. If there's anybody here this evening who would care to address the city, please approach the podium now and you may be recognized for up to 5 minutes. Seeing none, we will now turn to reports and communications from the mayor and the taking of action thereon. We have a long agenda tonight, so I will be brief. The city's inaugural Juneteenth celebration was a resounding success. 1 year ago, Jeff Engelbrecht, the City Housing and Community Development Director, took up the charge to form a citizens committee and plan the event. They came through in a big way. I thank Mr. Engelbrecht and the committee members who worked together to make this inauguration celebration possible. Dr. Alicia Sloan, local business owner Luana Anderson, University Heights councilperson Justin Gould, former University Heights councilperson Sandra Berry, and longtime residents Denise Jackson and Virginia Benson. There are others who came together to make this event happen, including members of this council who supported it in the planning and also by attending. Thank you all. 2 more things. Joint meeting of the city governments of University Heights, Cleveland Heights, Cleveland Heights University Heights School Board and Heights Library Board is set for Wednesday, June 29th at 6:30 p.m. That's next week. I also ask that council members reserve the evening of July 13th for a special meeting to consider and approve a bid on the Washington-Silsbee-Saybrook project, together with any matters coming from the July 7th Planning Commission meeting. Happy summer solstice. This concludes my report. Next is reports and communications from the City Council and the taking of action thereon. Mrs. Weiss, do you have a report?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to mention that the charter review nominations are still under consideration until June 30th. And just for the residents' knowledge, the council and the mayor have no input into the commission discussions. This is an apolitical, unbiased group, which we did this intentionally. We did include an ordinance for an interim and final report from this commission to the council and administration that can be publicly discussed. And finally, we do have a joint facilities and infrastructure committee meeting on June 27th, which will continue to review the draft of the facilities assessments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Weiss. Any other reports from council at this time? If there are none, then we will move on to item 8, the reading and disposition of ordinances, resolutions, motions, and consideration of agenda items, beginning with item A, proclamation dedicating July 8th as Jeffrey H. Friedman Day in University Heights. Mrs. Blankfeld.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I begin, I wanted to note that Margaret Duffy Friedman is here with us this evening as we honor her late husband and his contributions to our community. If I may, I'll read it.
Yes, please.
Okay. Put the reading glasses back on. Whereas this proclamation is declared July 8th, which would have been his birthday, or was his birthday, as Jeffrey H. Friedman Day in the city of University Heights, Ohio, and celebrating his lifelong dedication to serving his community. And whereas Jeffrey Friedman was born on July 8th, 1947, and was a lifelong resident of the city of University Heights from the time he was just 1 year old in his family's home on Hillbrook Road, and later as an adult with his loving and devoted wife, Margaret Duffy Friedman, in their beautiful home on University Parkway. And whereas Mr. Friedman was a graduate of Heights High School and a member of Heights High Distinguished Alumni Hall of Fame, and whereas Mr. Friedman was the recipient of the Scholastic and Political Achievement Award and graduated cum laude with a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from John Carroll University, where he helped forge paths for greater mobility and accessibility for all. And whereas Jeffrey Friedman earned his Juris Doctor from Case Western Reserve University School of Law, whereafter he was a sole practitioner and served as a part-time Ohio Assistant Attorney General, and eventually founded one of Cleveland's most reputable and successful law firms, Friedman, Damiano, and Smith. Through his work there, he committed himself to a lifelong career seeking justice for his clients with the highest level of expertise, professionalism, and integrity. During his decades of practice, he developed a reputation for being a tireless and devoted advocate for the seriously injured and disadvantaged. And whereas Mr. Friedman's keen understanding of the law and appreciation of service to his community motivated his successful run for the City Council of University Heights, where he served as a councilperson for nearly 30 years, earning the appointment by his council peers of vice mayor for several terms. And whereas Mr. Friedman continued to forge his legacy of community contribution by serving on numerous boards, including Easter Seals and the Spinal Cord Injury Foundation. And whereas through his career and good works, Mr. Friedman has left behind a vibrant legacy of selfless and dedicated service, the memory of which council desires to preserve and celebrate. Now therefore be it proclaimed by the Council of the City of University Heights, Cuyahoga County, Ohio, that this council, for and on behalf of the residents of University Heights, does hereby declare July 8th to be Jeffrey Friedman Day in the city of University Heights. This will be signed by all members of council, and we will make certain that Margaret Duffy Friedman receives a copy of the same. to have had a resident who lived here, probably one of the longest residing residents we've had thus far, and to have lived such an incredibly full and selfless life dedicated to serving others in so many capacities. This proclamation is definitely deserved, and we are delighted to do so.
Very
Thank you,
good.
Mayor.
Thank you, Mrs. Blankfeld. I'd like to recognize Margaret Duffy Friedman.
I realize I'm out of order here.
Well, why don't you come up to the podium so you can speak into the microphone, and yes, please. And it is okay to take things out of order on special occasions, so please.
Thank you. Thank you for bestowing this honor in Jeff's memory. And Kelly, you probably have more stories about Jeff because you probably remember him the most. But there are a lot of fun, good stories of Jeff's involvement as councilman and vice mayor of University Heights. Fun stories of the challenges and the deep friendship that he had with Burl Rothschild and council members. Jeff loved this city, and I appreciate everything that all of you do to maintain that legacy of love for University Heights. So although Jeff is not with us anymore, his spirit and passion and legacy will live on through all of you and through all of those who loved him so dearly. So thank you again. I appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can just add a few personal words. Before I ever lived in University Heights, I knew Mr. Friedman. I was a law student. It was the mid-'90s, and I clerked not for his firm, but for another firm that shared space on the 6th floor of the Standard Building, where Friedman, Damiano, and Smith was for many years. So I first met Mr. Friedman, and I can't say I actually worked with him, but certainly worked in the same general vicinity as him going back many years, and I know that he was a tireless and passionate advocate for his clients. I know later then as an attorney, sometimes being aligned in interest with his clients, sometimes not aligned, but nevertheless, everybody doing what needed to be done to effectively advocate and seek justice. And Mr. Friedman was all those things. It is a loss to this community to lose somebody as giant as Jeff Friedman, and I know that we all miss him. This is a suitable and special honor that we're doing here this evening, and delighted that this council has put it together in his memory and for the family that loved him.
Mayor?
Mr. Gould.
Well, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to honor your late husband. I also wanted to share as a newer member of council that his the stories about his life and legacy always involved you, and the support and really power behind those moves that you provided. And so I just wanted to say thank you so much to you for sharing him with us over these years, and thank you so much for the contributions that you helped bring to University Heights as well.
Is there anything anybody else would care to say before we vote? And if not, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Did we have a motion?
Oh, I'm sorry, we do need a motion, thank you. Is there a motion?
I
to-
also move, Mayor.
Okay. Motion by Mrs. Blankfeld, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Sachs. Any discussion on the motion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Motion carries. We will circulate and sign in duplicate the proclamation. Okay, next is item B, a motion to approve and issue the request for proposals for information technology, IT, managed services for the City of University Heights as drafted and recommended by the University Heights Technology Advisory Commission. Before I recognize Mr. King, it occurs to me that Mr. Rock is absent, and though he did not get to vote on this, I am reasonably confident he would sign. Mrs. Friedman, if it's all the same to you, why don't we wait until we can get Mr. Rock's signature for your, I mean, we would have liked to have given it to you today, but why don't we do that? Okay. All right. With that little bit of housekeeping aside, then, we'll proceed with item B, which I just read. Mr. King, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'd like to thank the Technology Advisory Committee for spending the time and putting together all the work to get the RFP for technology services for the city together. In particular, I'd like to thank the co-chairs, John King, Chris Hudak, and of course the rest of the committee. So just want to give a little context on what we're looking at with this proposal. It includes all the services that Starfish Technologies provides for us today. It includes transitioning systems to the cloud, and as well as a new phone system for the city. These updates will bring us in line with modern IT practices, better position the city for moving to new facilities in the future, and lays the groundwork for providing improved services and communications with residents via technology. I also wanted to thank Paul Hugenberg of Ray & Associates for advice on drafting the RFP and providing us with the template that gave the committee a head start on drafting the document. And I'd like to recognize Zheng now. If you want to speak to the document at all, or sure. Sure, if you could step to the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak here, Mr. Meyer, Mr. Reismeyer, and the council member of the council. So I think we are very close to sending out the request for proposal. The very last agenda item on that the input from the council is the basic timeline of the bid. When do we need to send it out, and at roughly what time do we want to make the decision? And then we also want to set the time point for a set of intermediate position, including sending out asking for the deadline for the question from the bidders, and information session with the bidders, where we can answer their question publicly, and also probably some of the presentation from the finalists to the council. So once we set the timeline for these several points, I think we are very ready. We are very much ready to go, and we just need to also find out the right way to advertise and to send the bid to the right group of vendors to make sure that our bids reach them. Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jane. Yes, Mr. King, did you want to continue, or did that conclude your portion?
No, so before the meeting, we had discussed a bit about timeline. I think that most of that would be handled administratively. Would you care to speak to that?
Yes, I can do that. Thank you, Mr. King. Yeah, I think that the draft RFP as prepared by the Technology Advisory Commission is in such form that if the council sees fit that it can approve going out to bid with it tonight, there are a few blanks on the timeline to fill in. That is something that Mr. McConville, Mrs. Thomas, and I can work on to make sure that the timeline is honored in an appropriate way and in a way that works well administratively to provide adequate time for questions, adequate time for a presentation, and then an appropriate bid deadline, as well as then consideration of those bids. It's something that we are eager to see happen, and at the same time, we want to make sure we are deliberate in how we move forward on that. I did not necessarily want to see us fill in dates here in case for some reason administratively or for workload issues or any other reason that we wanted to be sure that we had, good solid dates that we could stick to, so that when we advertise this and then as word of this goes out in the community among prospective bidders, that we cast the net wide and get a good number of bids to consider. So I feel like I hope that addresses your question, Mr. King, and I think I've spoken with both Mr. McConville and also with Mrs. Thomas about this, especially Mr. McConville. Kelly, I don't know how much you and I know we've talked about it a little bit, but not as much as recently as I have with Mr. McConville. But Mrs. Thomas is definitely our point person with regard to coordinating going out to bid. So I want to make sure that we work with her and her schedule to do it in a deliberate and thoughtful way. Mrs. Weiss.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just had a couple questions, not sure who exactly to direct it to, but we still have some unknowns in this RFP. We don't have the right number of desktops, laptops, and tablets still. They're still highlighted yellow in the packet.
I think we filled it in the latest.
Oh, so this might not be the latest.
So yellow is to denote that it was modified from the template.
But the tablets have question mark on it still.
Oh.
I won't have it go out with a question mark.
So there was
Okay.
50 tablets, and I understood you say that the number 50 was tablets and cell phones?
Yeah, and smartphones. Yeah, that's the
Together?
Yeah, together.
Number?
That's a number I got. I don't know the detailed breakdown, but
Yeah.
since tablet and smartphone, they usually run the same operating system, so they can be reasonably grouped together.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just had two more questions. First of all, I want to publicly thank Zhang. He's been super instrumental, in putting this together, along with Chris and Brian, but especially Zhang. I would like, and I don't know, I guess this is for the law director, I would like some kind of timeline. Like, I don't want this going out past 45 days. In terms of, I don't know what the law director's thinking and when when you had the conversations, and how you want to write that in, but I just think within 45 days, and I don't know, 30 to 45 days, that this could definitely go out, and I think bids are usually open for 15 days. Is that 2 weeks?
Correct.
Is that usually the time frame?
Well, it can vary. I mean, there isn't a set statutory amount of time that exists. So, my thought is there would be some discussion on what is the appropriate amount of time for the RFP to be outstanding. In the past, we have conditioned some authorizations and approvals on the exercise of the authority given thereby within a particular time frame. So I would just recommend that you make your motion with a sunset, that if the RFP hasn't gone out by a particular period of time, the authorization no longer exists and the administration come back to council.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think it's appropriate to do that. Part of, going into the summer recess is that we want to be mindful of vacations that people have and making sure that people are here at appropriate times, whenever there's a bid opening or whenever there's a question period. We do have Mr. Schaefer listed here as the one to direct questions to. This is so that, part of this is handled administratively and not, put solely on Kelly's shoulders to do. But we nevertheless rely on Kelly for her expertise on these matters as we work on this. So presuming this passes this evening, that'll be something that I would be hopeful to sit down with Mr. Schaefer and Mrs. Thomas this week to discuss the handling of this going forward and have this go out in relatively short order once we've filled in probable dates, conferred with the law director, and get an appropriate legal notice put together for advertisement.
You go
Go
first.
ahead.
Oh,
Are you
I just had one
finished?
more question. Okay, thank you. I wanted to, I guess I would consider this a special project. I'm not sure what you envision Mrs. Thomas's role to be in this.
Well, Mrs. Thomas has generally been the person who has, she has the most experience here with regard to the handling of going out to bid and
That is something that clerks of council usually
Okay.
manage,
Yes.
that process.
and at the same time, I like the opportunity that's here for Mr. Schaefer to do, this work. But, at the same time, I'd like to rather be collaborative with the staff that we have to do this expeditiously, but also make sure that we do it all right on the first try, so we don't find ourselves rerunning notices or changing dates on this particular item.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Sachs.
Thank you, Mayor Brennan. Thank you so much. I was at one of the meetings, and I was very impressed with the conversation and the level of detail that was discussed, and I can see it reflected in this proposal. So thank you so much, you and the committee and Councilman King. What I will say is what I'm seeing, at least in this version, if this is the most updated, is quite a few yellow highlighted areas that really should be filled with finite things. It doesn't have to say the date, October 1st, but it has to say like 45 days or whatever. And it permeates this document, which if Ms. Kelly and Mr. Schaefer's input were supposed to be a part of this, it perhaps should have been done before presenting to council, so that it would be a complete document. And I'm not comfortable voting on approving a document that becomes a boilerplate pretty much and should be ready for us to not wait for other work that maybe it'll be 45 days, maybe 30 days, maybe it'll be, and also one other thing that's concerning that's in yellow is something I spoke about at the meeting I was at, which is the service levels and expected response and resolution time. That's really critical, and I think we just need to land somewhere. Whether it's on page 9. Of
We might be looking at
272.
entirely different documents,
That's
but
what
all
I've
of
got.
that is, I'm looking at the last draft, and all of the service level agreements are all filled out.
So I'm looking at council packet for today's date. I don't know where else to look.
When I accessed mine through Dropbox, it did have.
I'm looking at
that
it's through the Dropbox.
on page 9.
I'm looking at page 9. Yeah.
272? Okay.
It starts on page, let's see, mine starts on page, it's a nice long document, 1.
There's a lot of yellow.
There's way too much yellow. And
So
if you want to use people's names, that's fine. I think it should be positions, not names. There's just so much of this that should be a boilerplate. And then you specify, make it specific for this piece. So
Yeah.
please help me understand.
I'm not sure what version you're looking at, because the only things that are
This one?
missing
Yeah, the one
are
we're
the actual, the timing of the document. I guess line 10 is missing
See,
the
council
time.
that's-
But the yellow is to denote the things that have changed in the document.
No, a lot of yellows are empty.
There might,
So,
Which page is empty on yours?
yeah.
Which page is empty on yours?
okay, so for instance, and also it says supports about 100 end users, which you just said 50, so that's double. But let me see where. So page 9 is of most concern. And that's not empty, but it's all yellow. So is that the final?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why isn't it, okay.
We've received multiple versions of this have been distributed.
Yes.
So this is just, as we're doing our review, to help expedite the review, showing us the areas that have changed since the last revision we received. So this is just telling us that this service level and expected response and resolution time was a change, so that we added, I believe, the specificity of hours
Yes.
into this.
Yeah. What about the bottom of page 12 and top of page 13?
Where it says,
The RFP timeline.
So that we can make in motion
Yes.
before we approve it today.
So the only comment I'd like to make on the timeline, all the other dates kind of fall in with when we put this out, but I think that we should have it open for 30 days, at least. So
There
there's,
are several time pieces to the timeline, though. 1, 2, 3,
Right.
4, 5, 6, 7, which it should. I like the way that it's laid out. It's just that's where it falls apart. You know, if somebody makes a timeline that's arbitrary, or I'd like to see what that is I guess what I'm saying. May not agree with me, but it just seems a little too open in important spots. Like delivered to the address indicated above by noon, XXX. Enough said. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Sachs.
there is one thing that I
Go ahead, Mr. King.
would like to note on line 9. It refers to the council chairman, and I believe that would be changed to clerk of council to receive the bids.
Depending on how we handle that administratively, whether those are directed to our clerk or would go to Mr. Schaefer, we'll figure that out. I mean, either way, there is no quote-unquote council
I
chairman.
believe that falls under the clerk's responsibilities.
They should be received by the clerk.
Every other
Yeah.
council.
I would recommend clerk.
Yeah, okay. Then it would be clerk of council. Okay.
Mr. King, I'm sorry, Mayor.
Yes,
can I
go
say
ahead,
something?
Mrs. Weiss.
So in response to what Mrs. Sachs just said, I'm wondering if on the timeline, we could put months or like 30 days, 15 days, when we make when we propose to make a motion. Is that something that's doable, Mr. McConville? Or is it better to have actual dates?
Before you go, may I make a suggestion?
Dates.
I think it'd be preferable to leave it blank so that, we can put our heads together with respect to everybody's schedules at City Hall this summer, rather than be handcuffed by dates that may end up being arbitrary or timeframes that may end up being arbitrary and unworkable. I would hate to have to call a special meeting to change something. But if we leave it flexible, then the law director, clerk of council, Mr. Schaefer, and I will be able to work out dates that are both expeditious and meaningful. We didn't fill in dates necessarily because until we know that we can go ahead with this, those dates would be subject to change, and the timeframes themselves may even be subject to change depending on people's availability over the summer. But we do want to work on this over the summer. So that is why we have it set forth like this. Now that I've said that, I kind of took the floor for Mr. McConville. If you have something you'd like to add.
You can do that.
Okay.
You can establish particular timeframes from the date of issuance.
Mayor? If I may.
Yes, Mrs. Blankfeld.
Having performed this role for many years for Beechwood, I've never seen an RFP go out for something for a city without those specific timeline dates in there. I believe Mr. McConville mentioned that there could be a clause in there that sunsets when it's good until, but I would feel more comfortable if we actually had dates before it came before council.
Speak into the microphone, maybe. I did.
Well, I don't think it would go out, it would not go out without dates. The dates would be inserted.
I mean, I
would agree
understand-
that no RFP would
Yeah.
leave and be published that have blank,
Correct.
where there should be dates.
But for council to approve it and for it to move along expeditiously, I mean, we've been working on this process how many years? Couple of years?
Over 2 years.
Yeah, so I'd like to see it more defined.
Mayor?
Yeah, Mr. Gould.
I mean, I appreciate the administration's point, which is that there's a lot of moving parts to come up with every one of the dates. The only date I really care about and want to be definitive around is the presentation of selection to city council. I mean, if we say that we want this by September 19th,
That's
and
what I'm saying.
that's the one day. That's the date. You work around everything else. You have a 30-day period. You can,
Work
however you want to
backwards.
do everything else before that, however the schedules and timelines work, we know by, we get back in the first meeting of September, and by the second meeting in September, we have that to us, which would then require all of those things to be done at whatever time the administration sees fit before that. I don't think that's too
I would
cramped.
like to see that. I appreciate what you're saying. I'd also like to say, though, that I'd prefer not to see an RFP come before council again that has so many moving pieces that are not filled in. But I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Gould, and that makes sense, and I would be comfortable with having that specific date in there in September.
I would be fine with, I'm fine with your suggestion, Mr. Gould, that however we work out the dates, that the target is to present the selection to City Council by the September 19th meeting, the second meeting of September. So, working backwards, we would make sure that everything that we do leading up to that date provides ample time to present on this at that meeting. The first meeting in September tends to be a long meeting anyway, so it would be better to do it at the second meeting
Makes
of
sense.
September. And I certainly have no objection to a motion that puts in as a condition that the presentation of selection to City Council would be for the September 19th meeting. Mrs. Weiss.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just want to circle back with Mr. King. I actually think that the September 15th, and I want this done, I think that's a very aggressive date, especially when we're probably 30 days out from even sending this out, and then another 30 days to actually get the bids back, and then you have to do 4 different things before it even gets a presentation to City Council. So I was actually going to say before Mr. Gould, which I'm glad he mentioned, the presentation to City Council is a very specific date and important date. I actually think the issuance is just as important. So I think those two, I would be, much more comfortable, not necessarily a date for the issuance, but within 30 days or within 45 days, whatever council feels is appropriate. And then the presentation, I think, should actually be October 5th, that second meeting in October.
I would tend to agree that would be easier for it, because we need to have the tech advisory committee meet and discuss the, get ready for that presentation and discuss the merits of the proposals, so I agree.
Okay, so within 30 days for the issuance of the RFP and legal notice, and then aiming for presentation of selection of City Council by the second meeting of October.
Yeah.
Okay. And Mr. King, you seem to be agreeable that that was a
Yes.
reachable, achievable. Okay.
Should we consult?
And, we may not have factored in the part where we go back to Tech Advisory Commission before we present to council, which wouldn't necessarily be listed explicitly on the timeline, but is something we would handle internally.
So do I need to make a motion to amend if I'm correct? Okay, do I need to make a motion to amend, or can I just approve with stipulations?
I would amend.
Okay. So I'll make a motion to amend the RFP as follows, so that the on line 9, council chairman is changed to clerk of council. And on the line after 288, excuse me, wrong line, that the line after 412, issuance of RFP is within 45 days of today, and presentation of selection to City Council is October 19th, 2022.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Gould to make those amendments. Mrs. Thomas, did you get the amendments? Okay.
Sticky.
Yes.
We all are.
Motion to amend was for, at lines 412, issuance of RFP/legal notice would be within 45 days of today's date. Just below that, the presentation of selection to City Council would be October 19th, 2022. And on the first page, line 9 would change the words council chairman to clerk of council. Okay.
Okay, very good. Motion by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. King. Mrs. Blankfeld, did you have a point?
I just wanted to give a shout out, if you will, to Ted Troxel, who guided this process. He was the previous chair of this Tech Advisory Committee, and everyone who worked alongside him all of that time, for a very long time, before we got to this point. So I just wanted to make that note.
Sorry, I just would make one other amendment there to.
Do you need with a second, a separate motion?
Yeah, why don't we vote on the first amendment and then we can make another amendment?
Sure.
Oh, yeah, the law director seems to confer, or
We have a
concur.
motion and second on the table.
Yeah, we do have a
Withdraw my
motion.
motion.
Whatever your pleasure.
We can do that too.
It's fine. Vote on it. It's fine.
Mr. McConville was raising his hand, so.
Oh,
It looks like
Finance director.
Mr. Kennedy had something.
Yeah, Mayor, just wanted to point out that there's conflicting references in here. One is the RFP timeline, and then the bid sheet references an RFQ. Those should be the same.
Okay.
You're asking for proposals,
Not qualifications, yes. No, thank you for that. That is probably something we should amend on a separate motion. Okay, very good. So why don't we take if there's no further discussion on this first amendment, why don't we take a vote on that? Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll?
Mrs. Sacks?
Nay.
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries, and those items are amended. Now, was there a subsequent amendment, Mr. Gould?
Mayor, I'd make a motion to amend line 222, so to remove your name and simply have the role that you have, and the support for the document shouldn't be linked to the individual. It should be linked to a position.
Correct, such as clerk of council or,
There's also Ben Schaefer. I mean, the names are throughout.
yeah.
But I think the references, I believe, to Ben Schaefer are as to this project.
It shouldn't be the job title. Could be him or someone else at any time.
I think
Okay.
it is, for me, I recognize what you're saying, but the only substantive difference for me is that line 222
Understand.
is actually requesting how the work would be done in future. And so we would never want somebody to say,
was
well, I
me.
bid on this and it was to report to Michael Dillon Brennan, and now,
He's not here.
he's not the mayor, and I don't want.
To that
That-
end, do you need to specify clerk of council, Thomas?
No, I don't. I don't think, I just think, that's my amendment, is that, and then RFQ to RFP on the
On the bid
bid
sheet?
sheet.
Yeah, okay. So Mr. Gould, your amendment is, so that line 222 simply reads, support staff will report to the mayor,
Correct.
and on the bid sheet that we correct RFQ and make it RFP.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Motion by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Weiss. Any discussion on the motion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sacks?
Nay.
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Amendment carries. Is there a motion to approve and issue the RFP as amended?
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Gould. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Second by Mr. King. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sacks?
Nay.
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. I'd like to thank Jang and everybody on the Tech Advisory Commission for their strong work. Also, Mr. King, who's been working on this since before he was a councilman, I think. And certainly, Jang, thank you for being here today as well. Your service here to the city is much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next is item C, a motion to accept the bid from Roniak Paving, Inc. as the lowest and best bidder for the 2022 street improvement program and entering into contract with the same in an amount not to exceed $753,928.75. I'll go ahead and start. Mr. Chuney could not be here this evening, but this is an item that he presented on. He recommended that we accept the bid on Roniak. It was tabled to go to Finance Committee for some further discussion. Mrs. Weiss is the chair of that committee. I trust, Mrs. Weiss, you have a few things you'd like to say about this at this time?
Yeah, no, thank you, Mayor.
Please go ahead.
We had a Finance Committee meeting where we were going to make a transfer from some ARPA funds into this account, and I think it was $100,000, and then we were going to reassess in the third quarter if we have additional revenues that we can cover with this overage. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mrs. Weiss. I think it was, and if I'm not, I don't believe I'm misstating it, I think it was then the general sense of the Finance Committee that we would proceed, though we will be returning to looking at the funding issue come September.
Yes.
And then it would be the recommendation that we go ahead and approve. Okay. To that end, is there a motion?
So moved, Mayor.
Okay, motion to accept the bid from Roniak Paving as the lowest and best bidder for the 2022 street improvement program and enter into a contract with the same in an amount not to exceed $753,920.75 by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Cooney. Any discussion on the motion?
Bless you.
So noted. If there is no discussion, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Next is item D, motion to approve price quote from Starfish for IT emergency support and service for a 3-month period of July, August, and September 2022 in an amount not to exceed $16,650. This is, we've been going quarterly with approval of emergency services from Starfish while we continue the RFP process. And this carries us through for another 3 months through the summer and then into September. So this is similar to prior quotes and would ask for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Okay, motion approved by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, I'll take the second from Mrs. Blankfeld. Any discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Next is item E. Motion to approve price quote and agreement from Rock the House Entertainment Group in an amount not to exceed $15,254.50 for 5 of the 2022 Summer Concert Series, July 7, July 14, July 21, August 4, and August 11. Mr. Schaefer, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Council. As noted, this is for 5 of the summer concerts. We kicked off this past week. The quote for those 5 concerts is in the amount of $15,254.50 from Rock the House. I did see quotes from both from them as well as Huey's and NPI, who we've also used in the past. This is a higher cost than we've experienced in recent years, both in part due to increased fees for labor, fuel, equipment, et cetera, as well as demand of concerts coming back, and the fact that we are back to pre-pandemic levels of number of concerts, whereas last year we trimmed it down to allow time for folks to get vaccinated and whatnot. So we are requesting that amount. As noted in the memo that's included in your packet, we did have to handle the first 2 concerts separately, so that grand total for the service is just over $21,000. But this is for the 5 concerts. They are separate contracts, but because the total amount was such for the remaining 5, did want to bring this before you.
Yes, very good. Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Any questions? Mr. Cooney.
Mr. Kennedy, looking at the budget, will this be line item 100, 1330, 54740 for that amount? Is that the correct line item?
I'd have to check on that if you give me a few minutes,
Sure.
Mr. Kuhn.
So the grand total from the first 2, I'm sorry, Mayor, may I?
Yes, go ahead, Mrs. Blank.
So the total amount for all of the concerts, the first 2 and those 5 that are coming, the total amount is what?
The $21,356.30.
Are you asking?
You can go first.
Mrs. Sachs.
Thank you, Mayor Brennan. So that's the cost of the entertainment. What is the whole cost of the concert? So including, is there police overtime and is there service department? I'm just curious what the entire cost of the concert series is.
Sure. So aside from that, the bands typically have a fee that they charge, and that varies. As far as police and service, it's minimal staffing. I'm not sure the exact cost of that off the top of my head. I would have to find that out.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the band fees? Do you have a total amount for what we're contracting with? Because I would think it's part of that line.
No, this is just for the sound.
No, I understand, but I'm just curious what the whole thing costs. I understand. I appreciate this.
I don't recall off the top of my head. I mean, I think they vary from, a few $100s to $1,000 or so, depending on the band.
I'd be interested at some point just to know what the whole summer series cost for that number of concerts that were back in full session at some point. I don't know who provides that, if that's the mayor or you or the finance director.
That's something we can get from finance. That's something that can be put together. It's all documented.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah,
very good.
Mrs. Sachs, I'm just making some notes for, as we move things forward for the fall for the budget, some of those items. I'm making notes regarding some of those questions that you have so perhaps a little bit, we can see a summary as we work towards a budget in the fall in regards to the summer concert series.
I think that's helpful to know, because then maybe kind of average cost or whatever per concert, what can we really go back to full, perhaps we can, and what would be budgeted at the high end or whatever.
Because it's a wonderful thing. All
It
the
is.
communities have it.
Right.
But it would be nice to know what we're spending and how we can.
Thank you, Chris. Thank
I would
you,
agree,
Mr.
yeah,
Cooney.
we should, and I feel like
Yeah,
Mr.
thank
Schaefer's
you.
on the spot here, but it's not the
Yeah.
intention, but those are good questions to ask, yes.
I went to the first concert, and I had a good time dancing with Mr. Weber.
Yes.
I'm sorry I missed
And
it.
Mrs. Weiss got a great picture.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's so great, but.
Well, very good. Mrs. Weiss, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I'm just not sure. I want to ask Mr. McConville. So I don't like when contracts are piecemealed for one event. So I don't know if it's appropriate to amend this motion for $21,356, or it's too late for that. But we knew that, we would have 7 concerts, not 5 concerts, so, that's right. So it bothers me when a project is not getting approved.
So from an approval standpoint, it would be, 6 here, half a dozen there. You can do it either way. The spending that's occurred to this point is within the spending authority, so we don't have an issue of any expenditure that isn't authorized. But obviously, going forward, we would have that, and this is all considered one project. So,
But the spending authority is abused because the
15,000.
project was 21,000.
Not 15,000.
right.
And-
What I'm saying is that at this moment in time, we don't have a violation of the spending authority because the total expenditures do not exceed that amount.
So, but the
But
problem.
without your authorization,
But the problem I have is, well, what happens if we spent, it could have been split up where it never got to the 21,000 and we would have never seen it. That's my whole point. So
well,
I want to make sure.
that creates a violation. If whether it's the mayor, an agency, intentionally divides up costs that are part of one project, they're not deemed to have complied with the spending authority.
But we knew it was going to be more than 15,000.
Right,
That's my point.
which is why you're holding the key to whether this concert series goes forward or not. If you deny the motion this evening, the mayor will not have authorization to spend these funds, and he can spend up to his spending authority, but not over, and so he will not be able to, the city will not be able to conduct the full.
I guess I just want to make 2 points very clear. Number one is we knew that this concert series would cost more than $15,000 and it never came before us a month or 2 ago. Number 2 is hypothetically we would have, not the concert series, maybe it's something else, we would never know to ask if there's a project and we have no idea. And that's the whole point of the spending authority, and that's the whole point of a per project spending authority.
Right, but remember, it behooves the administration to get this right every time, because if they don't, any party can submit a question to the state auditor, or alternatively, the state auditor can bring the issue up on their own if they don't see the proper authorization having existed for something that the auditor who comes in deems to be one project. So anytime the administration is not properly seeking authorization from council, they're undertaking personal risk. So the legal advice is going to be the same every time. It's going to be go get council approval, and it absolutely behooves, it behooves the administration not to take that risk.
Yeah, I would point out that the sound per concert, even with Rock the House, is nearly 50% more per show than it was previously. So it wasn't, if we had gotten pricing like we got last year, we would have been within our spending authority without having to go to council in order to handle the sound. It was only after we went and got 3 different bids that we realized that we were going to need to come to council because this would exceed the $15,000 spending authority. And we are in a position where if council were to decline to do this, the summer concert series would simply be cut short. We have not yet spent the money. So I don't agree that we knew necessarily that we would exceed $15,000 for sound before we went out to seek bids. But we're here today because it did exceed $15,000, and we weren't going to separate it into a separate contract for each show and pretend that it didn't somehow exceed $15,000, because we know that in the aggregate it does. And that's not how we operate. And I know previous administrations have done that, and I have eschewed that. I agree with this council that that's not appropriate for the administration to do. And thus we are here today, with the memo, with the information regarding the cost per show. We've used Huey's before, we've used NPI before, and now Rock the House did sound for us last week and is scheduled to do sound for us this week. and the sound for last week's show and this week's show is well within the $15,000 spending authority. If we decide that, this council decides that it doesn't want to approve the sound, then that is a grounds for not, proceeding beyond the amount that this administration may permissibly spend. I'm hopeful, though, that everyone here recognizes the benefit that it has in this community, that the concert series is something that is appreciated by this community. There are 3 concerts that don't use this sound, 2 of them being the symphonic band, 1 being Adisha Cup, which provides its own sound. And I'm hopeful that though we are in inflationary times and the labor and the cost here are more than we have spent before, that council will nevertheless see fit to approve this motion and allow the series to go forward. Mrs. Blanco.
Mayor, I don't think anybody's disputing that the concerts are a wonderful thing and everybody enjoys them. But I would appreciate moving forward that maybe Mr. Schaefer should take up this particular task earlier in the year so that things aren't coming to us when the summer concert series is already underway. I would prefer to see how much it's going to cost us beforehand.
Well, normally within the budget process, if prices had held generally to how they had in the past, that would have been part of the budget, and it was in the budget.
I thought it was it not, Mayor?
Yeah, that was the.
There's a line item for the summer concert series.
You're correct, that was my initial question, Mr. Kennedy, just to confirm the amount.
I'm sorry, maybe I didn't hear the answer. Did you get an answer?
He was getting it.
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
And it's something that we should, take up again in the budget when we have budget talks this fall. Mrs. Weiss.
Do you have an?
He
Go
has
ahead.
the numbers.
No, I actually want to hear that before I before I say something.
The sound historically has been in 2 places. One is under general city administration or miscellaneous professional services, and then the majority of the other expenses, the bands and ancillary costs that go with that, are in the summer concert series line.
And how much is that?
That is there's $662 for supplies, $12,449 for contracted services.
Okay,
And
so
then in the, there's a balance of about $20,000+ unencumbered in the general administration line.
for the concert specifically?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you say that? I just wanted to understand the lines. I just want to understand. You said there's a budgeted item and then there's an unencumbered amount, and I'm not understanding the differentiation that you're making. I also don't understand why sound for the summer concert series is coming from someplace other than the summer concert series line item.
Miscellaneous professional services and general administration is where those charges historically were placed. So to be consistent with prior years, that's why I kept them in there. There's $34,659 budgeted. And then that's budgeted. And in the summer recreation activities, they said there's $662 for supplies, and then there's another $12,449 for contracted services.
So it's $12,449 for contract services, and what was the other number for supplies?
662.
662.
It's, the area within the budget would be section 1330.
And the 20,000 is what remains from the 34?
Yes.
Okay, so this, I'll just add on to my next comment. I mean, that all has to be cleaned up next year, so maybe we could put a note somewhere that everything has to go into summer concert series as opposed to general administration. But, Mayor, you mentioned that the symphonic band has a separate charge, or?
No, simply that they don't use this sound system. They are unamplified. They bring
So
their
they're-
own amp for their announcements. They bring their own microphone and a small amp for the comments that they make between songs,
Okay, so
and
what-
that's not part of this.
So what they charge us is part of the fees that all of the different groups we pay.
Mr. Cook, do you happen to recall what, if anything, we pay the symphonic band?
That's fine. I mean, I just was making sure that they didn't have additional
No.
sound that
No,
is
no,
not
there
part of this.
isn't, yeah, there is not additional sound that we pay for the symphonic
Okay.
band.
So
Yeah.
I'd like to just make a motion to amend this quote for the $21,356 from Rock House Entertainment. And just as a side note, so the memo is dated June 16th with the different quotes. I'm sure, Ben, that you quoted this in April or May probably, right?
May, I think, yeah.
Okay, so we knew already that it was over the $15,000.
Right, so the Rock the House I went to later than the rest just because the other ones were coming in higher, and they were the ones we'd used before. But yeah, I mean, with the wanting to get everything started in process, that was
Okay,
why.
so again, that all has to come before council before anything is paid out or approved, but again, I made that motion to amend, so.
Okay. So there's a motion to amend the amount in the item E agenda. So it's an amount not to exceed $21,356.30. It may be worth amending that it's not for 5 concerts, but for 7 concerts.
Yes, I'd agree with that.
Okay, so we have an amendment, so item E would then be motion to approve price quote and agreement from Rock House Entertainment Group in an amount not to exceed $21,356.30 for 7 of the 2022 summer concert series, period. So motion by Mrs. Weiss, is there a second?
I still have a question.
Okay.
Is there going to be
Well, we have a
discussion after
motion,
that?
so there'll still be discussion after the
Okay.
motion. So
I'll
we
wait.
have a motion. Yeah, I'll take a second.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Cooney. Second by Mr. Cooney. Now, Mrs. Sachs, what was your question?
So in the Finance Committee, we're going to start with a timeline, right? We're establishing a flow chart, a timeline for as we prepare the budget for coming years. Does the summer concert series fall under recreation? Is it the Recreation Committee, or is it not assigned to a committee? I'm just curious, because
Seems like it should be.
So I'm just wondering if perhaps a planful timeline for that as well. We know it comes every summer, and there are different pieces that have to go before the next, so that we can make an informed decision and really understand the true cost in a timely manner. It's hard to fall on, an assistant to pull that together. Perhaps the committee can be, or some other process can be helpful, so we don't have a surprise again. That's all. That's my kind of comment and question for this council. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Sachs. Any other discussion on the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Gould?
Mr. Kennedy, the $20,000 of unencumbered in the miscellaneous expenses, have you already encumbered the 2 concert charge in that dollar amount?
Mr. Gould, I'd have to check on the detail. I don't have the detail because I can't get into it.
Sure. So the
on from here?
The only issue that I have is that there's, we've created a budget, there's $20,000 left in that budget item, and then the summer concert series with this $12,000 amount. And I just want to ensure that if sound comes out of miscellaneous, and there's $20,000 of miscellaneous coming in there, I don't want to amend the motion, because I think by amending, or I don't want to amend the dollar amount, because by amending the dollar amount, you're authorizing an expenditure greater than budgeted. And so so what I prefer is if the encumbered amount is not in there, we would not be able to spend that amount because you've authorized $15,254.
We're approving a price quote. We're not approving the budget item. There's a difference.
If you authorize the city to spend that money.
We're not. We're authorizing this quote only, which
So
they
I'll-
already
So
paid.
six and change it has already been spent. I think that's the common understanding. That's why I said you could do it either way. We've already spent $6,000 plus on 2 concerts in June. So the council can approve a total amount for the 7 concert series, or alternatively, the $15,000-ish amount for the 5 remaining, because those expenditures have already occurred.
I guess how do we ensure that whatever spending occurs is within the budgeted amount? Is there an add-on that you need to say to the motion to ensure that? Because what I don't want to happen is, for instance, if this $20,000 amount does not include the previous 2 concerts, or the 2 concerts that have already been paid for, then the $21,000 amount for the 6 concert series is greater than that which is budgeted.
Yeah, but either way you do the motion, you're going to end up in that place, because the total expenditure will be that $21,000 amount, either way.
Yeah, but so what I'm saying is I'm a no up to that. I want to reduce it by the amount that's budgeted. So meaning, however.
So that's a question for Mr. Kennedy, because I'm not exactly sure.
But we're making a motion on the quote, not the allocation. There's a difference. The quote totals 21,000. You can't spend more than the quote. We already spent 6 of the 21. You can't go over it.
But the budgeted amount is less than the quote.
Right, but I think if I understand you correctly, for purposes of trying to provide clarity, you're contemplating the idea that you would approve an amount that's less than the 15 for the remaining 5 concerts? Or
What I'm
that
saying
you
is
would
that we-
only approve 4, I don't know.
Council came together, and there's a budget. And that amount was $34,000. And of that $34,000, we've spent everything but $20,000 in that pool. There's $20,000 remaining. What is unclear right now is if that $20,000 is after let me back up. The mayor has authorization to spend up to, what is it? $15,000. I disagree that we have structured this in such a way that he is required to come to us if the gross expenditure for any item is more than his spending authority. So if someone comes and they say, I'm going to mow the entire, vault, and I'm going to do it for X amount a yard, and, it's going to be $30,000 for the entire thing, and I think the mayor can, based on how we have structured his spending authority, he can mow half the wall, and then stop and say, you want the rest of the wall mowed? You have to authorize it. And there's nothing what we've put in our ordinances that stops him from doing that. So what I'm saying is, based on the authority that council gave the mayor, he has encumbered 2 concerts worth of spending already. And I want to ensure that those amounts are reflected in what Mr. Kennedy is saying. Otherwise, we will be authorizing a total expenditure of $21,000, which exceeds the budgeted amount if that $20,000 does not include the encumbrance for the 2, by quite a bit.
Mr. Kennedy, though, also, it's not just the 34, which we encumbered 20. There's also another 12 in a different line item in the recreation department. So it's a total, right? It's a total of 46. Is that correct?
More like 47. 34,
With the $600 also?
Depending on what else gets charged to that line. Like I said, I would have to look in the detail. I would like to remind everybody that when the budget gets broken out, it gets broken out by line item, but that's not how council passes the budget. Council passes the budget based on payroll, which is salaries, and other expenses. You're not passing a budget that's by these individual lines. That's what we propose to spend, and it fits whatever the was by council of the budget for that department. The general fund budget contains lines for salary and personal service expenses, meaning benefits, and then other. That's how the budget is filed with the county. So these internal distributions are estimates based on prior year spending.
Wait, so Mr. Kennedy, we literally go line by line and make adjustments in the budget. I understand how we have to file legally with the county, but our internal budget is an exact allocation of what we approved.
I would disagree with you on that, so.
How do we-
This is a breakout of what that total is. What you do is get into what's a supply versus what's a material. If we put $500 in supplies and $1,000 in materials, and somebody codes the material as a supply, we're over the budget. So the same thing.
So what you're saying right now is you have payroll, and what was the other thing you said?
Other expenses,
You have
not payroll
payroll.
expenses.
I don't know if it was miscellaneous, or you have payroll, you have other.
Yes.
Everything other except payroll is going in other, even though we spend copious amounts of time going through this budget, making transfers, making allocations.
That's how the budget is filed with the county.
But our internal budget is not like that. I understand the legal piece of that, but our internal budget should be accurate
Well,
for...
these are the numbers that were presented at the time we had the budget discussions. What I'm trying to say is they're just an estimate of what comprises that total that's filed with the county. This is how we break it down. We did go through line by line. But for example, if you have under payroll, you have a line for health insurance. If somebody cancels their health insurance, we don't go in and adjust that number down and come back to council and say you should. Because I also don't know who's coming on that's going to need health insurance.
The budget.
So how much of the $12,000 has been encumbered and the $662 has been encumbered?
Nothing has been encumbered as of the end of May for either one of those two. I can't get into through our VPN to get current day information. The May report that was distributed to everybody, nothing was encumbered. And
So I'm just saying, I mean, to the Vice Mayor's point.
I understand exactly what you're
Okay.
saying. If you're comfortable with keeping it the 15, I'm okay with that, but I hope you understand my reasoning also, that this is a project, and a project needs to come forward to council. This whole quote is really $21,000. It's really not 15. I understand, and I'm fine to go with the 15 and keep it how it is, but I want you to understand what I'm saying also.
Absolutely. I just want to ensure, so I think it's fine if you do the $21,356.30. I ask you to consider amending the motion to place a restriction on there not to exceed the total, or from this specific line item, the miscellaneous, and not to exceed $34,659 in total as budgeted. Because if you're approving $21,356.30, and that $20,000 amount already includes does not include the encumbered 2 concerts, then you're actually authorizing this dollar amount to be greater. And I don't want to exceed what we've budgeted. So,
That's fine.
so Luke, what would the wording be to amend the motion such that we are ensuring that the audio for the summer concert series is coming from the traditional line item, which again is number. I'm turning to my colleague to my left who had the budget.
Section 13.
It is section 1330, number, scroll down here. 100-1330-54740, summer concert services, which was budgeted for $12,449.00.
But that's not where the audio comes from. It comes from miscellaneous executive spending of $34,000.
Correct. Yeah, that's the sound system.
Right, which is what we're talking about.
Okay, so the sound system was.
It's 100-1600-54950.
54950.
Yes.
So Luke, how would we ensure that the total amount that A, this dollar amount that we're approving comes from that line item, and B, that it does not exceed the total amount budgeted.
I think you would just say just that, condition it upon the total amount budgeted in that line item, 100-1600, 549.50 not being exceeded.
Okay.
Just so I'm clear, if for some reason it does exceed the line item, is it your position that we should cancel the last concert?
We certainly should have a discussion about why the dollar amounts for the concert series overall aren't within budget.
Well, because the sound came in 50% higher than last year, and we didn't go out to bid and take bids on sound until after the budget passed.
But we don't know that. We don't know that we're above the budget now. So we should, since that's our intention, we should have that intention, and then if we need to come back to discuss a greater amount, then we can do that.
Okay. Mrs. Sachs.
Thank you, Mayor. So back to my original thought, this should be treated as a project with the items beneath it. It should have a process with a timeline. By having a process with a planned process with a timeline, you wouldn't have to cancel the last concert, you just wouldn't schedule it, because you would know, or you would space them, or you would do something to stay within the budget. Whatever that is, because there would be, you know, the first step is to get this, go the second step, and then you have the entire, all your ducks in a row, so to speak, before you sign contracts and before you announce it to the public. That way you have control over it, you're not disappointing anybody. Just a thought.
Well, another thought is, if you want to book bands, you can't wait until May to do it. That has to be done
So do it
back
sooner.
in January.
Exactly. So
But the
plan
bands
it.
themselves are booked back in January and February,
Okay.
but sound is something that isn't booked until later.
But why not? So why not book them in? They probably love the business to make sure that they're locked in for the summer. So just yeah,
So I
for whatever it's worth.
why, when you book a band, why isn't it now, if you're doing that months ahead of time, why it wasn't in your encumbered amount? Does that only happen after you actually pay them?
You asking me?
No?
I didn't hear the question, so.
If you get a quote, then you can encumber it. If you don't get a quote, then you can't encumber anything,
But
so.
we just talked about how the bands are booked months ahead of time. So back, we knew about the bands in January, was it?
Oh, that's about the time we started doing that,
So
right,
you're
Mr.
booking
Cook?
people in January.
I don't
February?
book anybody.
Well, no, I know you don't book, but my question is, let me clarify. Based on the accounting policies and practices that you implemented the city after a contractor is booked and therefore their contract is signed, how is that reported to you and when do you place that into your encumbered amounts?
I would first see it when a requisition would be filed by somebody,
Okay.
either by Mr. Cook, Mr. Schaefer, and that would come in, and then we would determine whether or not the appropriate documents were attached to that. But it's contingent on getting that requisition filed. I don't really know who's been hired for.
So you might have a contract that's signed in January, but no requisition until July, August, and therefore you wouldn't encumber that amount?
If I didn't have a requisition, no, because that's how it gets into the accounting system.
He needs a requisition and the quote together to put it into the accounting system. So if nobody gives him it, he won't know anything.
But my question is that we just heard that $12,000 amount, that nothing's encumbered. But we also just heard that there are contracts that have been existing since the beginning of the year. So my question is, since he doesn't have access to the VPN right now, he should have those contracts. I would understand, I would expect that you would have those contracts that were signed in January into your system by now and wouldn't have to access the VPN. But I'm just trying to understand better for this summer concert series what your expectation is around these contracted positions, and that would go against the $12,000, and why the individuals who are contracted in January, February aren't already into the system.
Yeah, I don't know when the discussions were about hiring bands and executing contracts. Like I said, I will not see that until it gets entered by somebody as a requisition. Could be a week before the show, it could be 2 days before the show, it could be 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, most of the bands are just a few $100s. The cost of the talent is sadly, is well below what it actually costs to have the sound, which is, is an interesting statement on, the musician's talent versus the production side, but that's just how that happens to be. But, you know, these bands, you know, if we want to be in competition, have good bands play for us, if we wait until May to start signing bands, we're only
No,
going to get
we're
what's
suggesting
left.
it should happen
it's-
much. No, we're suggesting it should happen much sooner so that you have all the pieces
So
together.
before I amend my motion that's on the table, withdraw my, or whatever, we have to fix it.
Sure.
The one thing I just want to comment is, I think that the whole concert series can go into recreation. It's a good fit. And I think we can take that up in the budget where, as Mrs. Sachs and Mr. Cooney said, we can have a process. We make sure that there's timely requisitions and quotes that go into the system, you know, and if there are any outstanding ones right now, if they could please go to Mr. Kennedy ASAP, so those could be booked. But in terms of my motion, so what Mr. Gould said, my motion is fine for the $21,356.30, not to exceed, though,
Provided
with
that-
seven concert series, 2022 concert series, but not to exceed the $20,000 that is left.
Provided that it comes from 116,
Oh, the line item.
54950, and that the total expenditure does not exceed the $34,659.
For the summer concert series.
For the summer concert.
Kathy,
Yes.
that's the
Well,
motion.
for anything in
That's
that
the
line,
motion.
for anything in that line item, meaning that this line item is actually a miscellaneous expenditures for the administration. It could be all sorts of things that they could spend from that. I'm just saying, this line item comes,
I got you.
this dollar amount comes from that line. It's not just for the summer concert series, it's however that the administration has decided to spend that line item. And if we could do go over, then we need to come back and have a more accurate conversation about what the summer concert series expenditures are, because it may be very well, if we're paying these bands a couple $100 a pop, there may very well be thousands of dollars sitting in that $12,000 amount. I don't know what else would go into the summer concert series, because we haven't seen a total budget for that project. But I think it would be, we can have the conversation, but we just need the data for it and probably access to VPN.
Okay.
So do we have a motion? I want to make sure that Mrs. Thomas has whatever motion that we're making, and I want to make sure as chair I understand the motion that's being made. And I want to make sure that Mr. Kennedy understands the degree of...
We need a flow chart.
Can I, do you mind if I just say it?
You can say it.
I'll make a motion to approve the expenditure of $21,356.30 for the 7 summer concert series, provided that that total expense come from line item 100-1600-54950, and that the total expense for that line item does not exceed $34,659 as budgeted.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Gould. Mrs. Thomas, did you get all that? Very good. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, second by Mr. Cooney. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sachs?
Aye.
Mrs. Langville?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Very good, motion carries. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Next is item F, motion to approve contract for human resource services from Clemens Nelson in an amount not to exceed $25,000 for a 6-month period from July 1, 2022 to December 31st, 2022. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. There was $45,000 budgeted this year as part of the permanent budget to look into the possibility of getting some professional services related to human resource management. We've had some substantial needs, both in the area of day-to-day human resource management, for somebody to provide the employees with a structured training program that addresses all the official needs that we need to make sure that we can document that our employees have been trained, that will protect us in the future with respect to any kind of potential litigation. The HR structure right now is very much decentralized. The records for the administrative employees are maintained in the finance department. Other departments maintain subsidiary records for their particular sets of employees. All the records related to HR should be in one area to maintain consistency and have some kind of management overview of how the different departments are enforcing policies and procedures as included in the new manual that was passed. We also have a need for development of reviews of the personnel policy and procedure manual, as well as reviews of all the positions, particularly those in the non-bargaining unit, administrative capacities. That should be documented. We should update all the job descriptions, and we also, because of a slew of recent developments, have had some serious issues related to the Bureaus of Workers' Compensation, and there's a need for some kind of professional oversight of that. This was a contract that we received a proposal for after talking to a number of other municipalities. I think the mayor has some additional information on that, but we're projecting that the cost associated with this would be less than the cost that we are currently incurring with references to either our employment law firm or the law firm of the law director. What this will provide too is day-to-day personnel management. The part of the contract is that somebody is on site 1 or 2 days a week as necessary, and that's something that's been severely lacking. So I attached a reference letter that we requested from Clemens Nelson of their contributions in other communities. I know the mayor's talked to a couple other municipalities, so we would turn this over for his comments.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kennedy. I have spoken with Mayor Gallagher of Brookland and Mayor Ward of Lyndhurst. Also spoken with Executive Director Nick DeSico, Chagrin Valley Regional Dispatch. Mayor Gallagher, City of Brookland and the City of Lyndhurst have used Clemens Nelson for a number of years and are quite satisfied with the work they do and the suitability and the professionalism that they bring to their HR departments. I was part of the decision at Chagrin Valley Dispatch to move over to Clemens Nelson as well with Chagrin Valley Dispatch, and having spoken with Nick DeSico, so far so good with regard to that transition. And they are definitely the firm that can provide what the city has long needed here with regard to professionalizing our human resources, and it is something that I know that we are all in favor of. It's something that we discussed during the budget process, and this is something that we'd like to be able to implement this summer and get going for the second half of the year. So I recommend that this be approved so that we can get to work on getting going on this. Thank you. Mrs. Sachs.
Thank you, Mayor Brennan. I agree it is a necessity that's needed, and I appreciate the efforts to check the references and seek out this service. I have 4 questions. When you talk about centralizing the records, will that be somewhere else? Will that be in City Hall? Where will that be?
I would imagine, we would wait for their recommendation on best practices, Mrs. Sachs, but I would assume it would be somewhere in City Hall.
I would assume too. And I recall Chief of Police, Chief Rogers, being very concerned or vocal about having those, and I could be mistaken, but I'm recollecting his own human resources access to those files. So for administrative, there are all kinds of other issues with, I guess, police. So I'm hoping that that's taken into consideration. Will the city own the job descriptions and the forms and all those things that are created by this consulting firm? Do we know that? They'll
We
customize
have
it for
draft
us?
job descriptions for everybody, but those have not been updated in a substantial amount of time. We
Well,
want to make sure
a
that
year.
job descriptions satisfy all the requirements from a legal standpoint.
Sure, absolutely. I also remember that there was some policy and procedure or employee handbook that was recently written. Is that true?
Yes.
Will
Yes,
that be
we-
just reviewed? Will that be part of this? Will it be replaced?
Oh,
Do we
they have
know?
proposed to go
Just
through the
update it.
entire manual.
Okay.
And then get us on a regular schedule of updating that manual based on discussions with the mayor, the law director. Things happen during the course of the year that weren't originally contemplated in the manual.
I understand.
So we'll have to update that. And what we ultimately want to work towards is making sure that the manual addresses all the routine functional operations, and that the union contracts only
Exactly.
address the specifics to the union. Because in a lot of cases, there's conflicting language.
And I appreciate that comment. That was my next question. Actually, I have 5 questions. I've worked for organizations that have union and non-union personnel, and they actually have separate handbooks to address those and to make sure that all those. So I'm hoping, I don't want to assume, I don't really see that in here, but that they have experience with union and they are able to help us avoid problems or at least mitigate them. You know, I don't know if that has to be explicitly in the agreement or the addendum or whatever. But I put that to you to just make sure, so we don't have any surprises with that, because that is a specialty area that needs finesse. You did say there were serious Bureau of Workman Comp issues. Is that something we need to talk about in executive session or not?
I don't know that it's anything that we need to discuss unless you're looking to, well, it's not something that we were intending to bring. It's just something that is happening in the course of things. Our service department has been short-staffed as a result of workers' compensation claims, people being out. I wasn't necessarily planning on getting into a discussion about how we need to hire more people tonight, but it is part and parcel of the service department already being short-staffed and having, I think right now, 4 people out. But to your point about whether does Clemens Nelson have experience working with unionized workforce, if we go and look at the personnel and labor relations references, these are all public sector. They all have unions. I know that Brooklyn and Lyndhurst have unions. I know that Chagrin Valley dispatchers are unionized. I believe they're unionized as well. And yes. And there are, suffice it to state, I don't believe there are any of the references here that wouldn't have union workforce.
Good.
At least in part.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? And if not, is there a motion?
So moved.
Okay, motion to approve by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Blankfeld. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Next is item G, amended ordinance 2022-16, enacting codified ordinance section, 1424.14, entitled Engineering Fees and declaring an emergency. This is on second reading. Mr. McConville, would you care to go over this, please?
Thank you, Mayor. This ordinance was originally placed before council in March of this year. It's an ordinance that is creating a codified section that will allow the city to bill back owners and developers for engineering inspection fees. When it was placed on first reading, it had not been reviewed by the Building and Housing Committee, and so it went through committee in connection with a memorandum that I drafted that explained the structure of the ordinance. Essentially, the engineer will make an estimate of the fees. That amount will be deposited with the city and then will be drawn upon as inspections occur. At the conclusion of the process, if there's any amount left over, it'll be refunded to the owner or developer. And if there's any additional amount owed, it will be billed to the owner or developer. Currently, we don't have a codified ordinance that allows us to capture these fees, and it's been handled through the development agreement process.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Is there a motion to approve amended ordinance 2022-16 on emergency?
So moved on emergency.
Okay, motion on emergency by Mrs. Weiss. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second by Mr. Cooney. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none. Since this is on second reading, we do not need to suspend the rules, but we do need 5 to pass on emergency. So, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Next is item H, Resolution 2022-30, adopting the alternative 2023 tax budget. This is on second reading. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mayor. This is, as we discussed last time, an annual requirement according to state law. This basically projects our revenues and expenses for next year. It serves as a justification with the County Budget Commission for that entity to assess property taxes on our behalf to residents, commercial and individual residents of the city of University Heights. As I said last time, there is no change to the overall tax rate. We are changing the distribution on the inside millage of what we're allowed to collect and allocating more of that to both the police and fire pension funds. That will reduce the burden that we currently have on the general fund. The general fund is responsible for picking up the difference between the total cost of the pension payments for a year and what we collect on property taxes. So by increasing the amount that we collect next year, it'll reduce the amount that needs to be transferred out of the general fund or paid for out of the general fund to cover those expenses. But again, there are no changes to the overall tax rate, so everyone should be assured that the taxes will not go up because of anything included in this proposal. Once this is filed with the County Budget Commission, they'll review that, and then they will send back us some legislation in late August, early September, for council to formally approve the tax rates that they have set, which is basically predicated on this submission. So again, it's consistent with state law. It has to be filed with the County Budget Commission by July 20th. It has to be approved by the legislative body on or before July 15th. So I would hope that we could get this passed tonight so I can get it filed with the county in sufficient time.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Is there a motion to approve?
Also move me.
Okay, motion to approve by Mrs. Blankfeld. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. Sacks. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we call the roll.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, very good. Motion carries. Thank you. Next is item I, Resolution 2022-45, authorizing the City of University Heights to become a Power a Clean Future Ohio Community, PCFO, and declaring an emergency on passage an emergency. This is Mr. King. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I wanted to say that Kwame Batchway and Alana Stanchu from Power Clean Future Ohio offered to come again this evening. I let them know of our packed schedule and to spare them of that, and let them know that I thought that their presentations before council in April and at the committee of the whole meeting in May were very good. I'm excited about the opportunity of becoming a Power Clean Future Ohio community. Looking forward to seeing how they can help us with our new municipal facilities, our zoning code updates, vehicle fleet conversions to EVs, possibly in the future. And one thing that Elena brought to my attention within the past week was possibly an opportunity to begin looking into how we could update our street lights to LEDs. They've been working with other communities that have been exploring this, and they've been able to find some significant cost savings. I know that every year we have to transfer funds into that the assessments that we make for street lighting is excessive, and we have to transfer funds into there. So looking at, I'm looking forward to them being able to help us identify strategic capital investments to help drive down overall operational expenses, all while reducing greenhouse gases within our community. If we become a Power Clean Future Ohio City, we'll be joining 30 other cities across the state, including our neighbors in Cleveland Heights, Shaker Heights, as well as other area cities, Solon, Lakewood, Euclid, Cleveland, and Cuyahoga County as a whole has joined the organization as well. I wanted to thank Vice Mayor Weiss and Councilperson Gould for their support and assistance on this, being my first resolution before council. And if there are any questions.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. King. Is there any discussion, any questions as Mr. King is invited? Mrs. Blankfeld.
Do we have any idea, ballpark, how much these grants might be?
I don't think there are any specific numbers. It depends on per project. What this gives us is the ability to work with other PCFO communities, possibly going in as an aggregate with them.
Gotcha.
PCFO kind of has their ear to state and federal funds that might be available for us to apply grants to. So really just helping us see what's available out there and then helping us get those funds is what their specialty is.
Thank you.
Mrs. Sachs.
Thank you. Just Councilwoman Blankfeld, when they did their presentation, I asked them to consider creating some kind of a table with the different grants and the deadlines and the amounts and all that, and they seemed to think that was a good idea. So you can see where it falls out over here and what our needs are and what's identified. And
we can take that
so
into
I don't know if they're
consideration
doing
when
it, but that was asked. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Gould.
Mr. McConville, I appreciate the draft that you sent over with some of the changes. I think that there are some commitments that were made in the previous versions that aren't made here, but I did want to ask some questions regarding the impact of some of the policy portions. So it appears as though we are authorizing the creation and implementation of policy. Is that what we are doing by some of these sections? So the mayor shall be or their designee shall serve as the city's PCFO coordinator for implementation. And then we talk about this policy that's going to be created, or developing a plan, there we go. So there's like this, I understand that we were going to work with them, they'd provide data, they'd provide information, I thought that we would then be able to, we would be receiving that back and then be making decisions as a city here, but it appears as though, and I just want to make sure that that's, is what we're creating here is the authorization of the policy implementation independent of the body.
Yeah,
It's, essentially, I think you're authorizing the administration to choose among those policy choices. I mean, you could, the rub is in Section 8, I think. Is that what you're concerned about? I mean, I think the...
Well, Section 8, Section 5, and here's my thing, like, the mayor doesn't need our authorization to decide to get, 85% recycled paper rather than, 50%. Like, there are certain policies the administration has absolute authority to implement independent of council. I just want to ensure that in the broader sense, so for instance, which permit shall be issued for building, I just want to make sure that we're not authorizing
No, and I think mainly you're authorizing the administration to identify two of the 4 policy objectives that PCFO concentrates on as focal points for their work for you, but they don't limit it to that. I mean, in other words, I don't think that you're bound by a choice or an election to have them seek grant funding for you under one category or another from subsequently expressing an interest in one of the other categories. And what they're mainly going to do that is going to come before you as members of council is provide you data, number one, and number two, hopefully provide you with grant opportunities. And of course, accepting those grant dollars is within your purview.
And then the implementation, I guess that's the part that I was unclear about, is this designation of implementation.
You speak into the microphone.
I guess the part that I was unsure about is this implementation portion. So there's a portion here that talks about implementation, which leads me to believe that there's action that will be taken as a result of the policy creation, and that the mayor or a designee of the mayor would be making these implementations. And I'm just not clear why we're even authorizing that if the mayor has authority to do it. I just don't want there to be an additional...
So this is their form, and I think that they want to know who they're to deal with.
Okay. And I thought that we discussed that they would be dealing with the administration and council.
Right. Yes, you did make that
Was
clear.
that kind of the goal?
I suppose, yes. Yeah.
I mean, administratively, they would be dealing with us first, but there are going to be times, anything that's, significant, beyond the percentage of recyclable materials into the copier paper, if I may use your example, where we're going to be coming back to council because, major changes are going to require either the acceptance of grant money or the commitment of resources. And those are things that the administration cannot do on its own. Of course, we would be coming back to council on those items. When it comes to Section 5, this is again, based on their form. They just want to know who they're supposed to deal with. I would like to be as hands-on about this as possible, but I also realize that, there's just one of me and there's an entire city to run. So it says mayor or their designee, I'm going to be leaning heavily on Mr. Engelbrecht to work on this on the administrative side, although I intend to do as much as I can because this is an issue and a cause that means a lot to me as the city's chief administrative officer and executive officer.
And the only other thing that I thought was, that I just wanted to talk about a little bit was the Section 2 portion. You know, I want to be really clear about how, you know, council can set priority. We can at least, we can express a priority and ask the administration to meet that priority, you know, in what Section 2 is doing. But I don't want to send, I think, the wrong message that this is a priority over the other things that are discussed further down. So, you know, if I were to ask, you know, you do a whole bunch of work on police cars, or, you know, that we're going to get police cars and we're going to get a bid. And we've stated here a 30% reduction, and I think it's important when a body expresses a priority to administration that they really mean, like, that's what their priority is. And so if you were to say, okay, well, we're going to do the budgeting process, here's police cars, chief, listen, we need to reduce our emissions, they've set a goal of 30%, I want you to get, you know, electronic options for vehicles that are, and those end up being more expensive. Now, granted, we could disapprove those, but you will have already done the work administratively to kind of meet that priority. And so I'm wondering if we can soften that language to, you know, announces its goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the city of University Heights, and just leave it there without setting an actual amount as a stated goal, because I can think of several things that I prioritize over the 30% reduction.
Yeah, well, I think the language has been softened already, because we're announcing it as a goal in an aspirational sense, as opposed to a mandate that we absolutely shall reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 30%. It is, you know, I'm satisfied with the language that we've already reduced it to, stating it as a goal as opposed to a mandate. In my view, the language that's in this particular resolution is less important than the work that we do together as a city to improve our efforts at sustainability and reduce our carbon footprint. So there are a number of ways that we can go about achieving that, or making progress towards that, and you know, I think I appreciate your reticence, and at the same time, I think that's built into the language we have now. We are not mandating a 30% reduction. We're making a goal of it, because
I do
that's
think
what we
it's-
would like to do.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Please, go
I
ahead,
do
Mr.
think it's
McConnell.
aspirational only. I don't think it gives PCFO any sort of grounds for saying it's anything other than that. I also would note that it's your resolution, so if at any point in time you feel like it's prudent to change that percentage, you're free to do so through legislative action.
Yeah, I would add that it does mirror what a lot of other communities have done. I did, you know, administratively last year take the 30 by 30 pledge, which is, this is consistent with that, you know, seeking to reduce our overall carbon footprint by 30% by 2030. And it's, again, relative to 2010 levels. There have already been things that have happened in this community, publicly and privately, that have helped us towards this goal. So it's not like we even need to reduce an additional 30%. We just need to continue on our way to a 30% reduction based upon 12 years ago. So, and again, it's aspirational. And so much of this will really be in what we do with this after today. If we pass this resolution and then never call in a statute to work on anything, well, then nothing happened. But what really will happen will be the work that we do together to achieve and do better as a community. It's something that we know our residents are interested in, and you know, we want to make sure that we're carrying out you know, their will with regard to this item. Mrs. Sachs, I think I saw your hand up.
Thank you for taking the time. Thank you, Councilman King, for taking the time to do this and bringing the speakers to help educate us. Just semantics. So, Councilman Gould, will this make more sense to you? So, for instance, in Section 5, to add the word administrative, so the mayor or their administrative designee? or designee from administration. I don't know where you were going, if you thought it would be anybody who would be designated.
I'm fine with whoever the mayor
Okay.
wants to designate. I mean.
I might prefer that, actually.
Okay,
We
sure,
put that in
yeah.
my head, to add the word administrative or from administration, so that it's really tight, and they have access to our contracts and to what's going on. It's not necessarily a civic-minded person, or even someone on council. It's someone in the administration who's actively working with the mayor and all the staff at their disposal. I can appreciate that. The other is section 2. I understand that the mayor signed the pledge, 30 by 30, but would it be perhaps greenhouse gas emissions in the city of University Heights, to reduce it relative to 2010 levels? I mean, take out the 30%, is that what you're saying, so that there's at least showing some improvement?
I just don't know.
I'm not understanding.
Yeah, I guess my concern is that I
to
don't
lock
know what that means.
Right. I
And it may
asked
be
the
that it
question,
just
I
means
didn't get an
nothing.
answer.
I just don't know.
Right.
I don't know
You
what.
could add the adjective aspirational.
Aspiration.
But it's not even that.
aspirational goal.
It's just I don't.
So I agree with you. Early on, I think in a month I was doing that, I did send an email to the mayor saying, oh, I see you signed this 30 pledge. Can you please explain to me what the metrics are, what you're trying to achieve, what's the baseline, what are the goals? And I didn't get a response. So I'm at least glad to see there's something here, but I would like to see some metrics to know exactly what we're talking about
So
at some point down the road.
Yeah, and I'm sure we can establish those. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what that goal is. So, and I don't think it has to be here. I mean, we're not committing to anything. I think it's aspirational. I'm confident with the law director says it's aspirational, that's aspirational. And I think to the mayor's point, we can work to flesh that out. I mean, goodness, if I said, Brian, go flesh out what that means and create some goals for us, I mean, I think Brian would go out and create those, create some metrics, you know?
To be, that's really the way to go. Then
Yeah,
engage it.
I mean, I don't want to, put the, I don't want to have a chicken and egg problem here. The problem, I mean, the metrics that you're seeking, the plan that you want to see the details of, that's why we're bringing them on, so that we can work together to better formulate that plan. If I had that plan already and didn't, feel like I needed, the expert opinions of these consultants that they provide, at no cost to the city to help us develop, the plan,
That would
then.
help achieve the goals.
Right. I mean, the idea here is that we work with them to identify things that we can work on that are cost conscious and are environmentally forward-looking and are sustainable, and help us, ascertain where we are since 2010 relative to that 30% reduction. We have a number that the county has provided to us, but we don't have a great understanding, in my view, of how they got to that number. But working with consultants from PCFO, we can better see where we are in order to see where we're going. If we had all that information, we might not need to create this relationship, although I would probably still encourage it, because there are going to be things and resources that they would have beyond, the knowledge of any one person here. And that's why we want to leverage this, build on this relationship. We've had a lot of discussions, but the actual work comes after a resolution like this is passed. And they're eager to get to work with us, and we're eager to get to work with them. But, when you're asking for information that we don't have yet, because the people we're going to work with to get the information haven't been brought in yet.
And I'm fine, I mean, to respond to your question also, I mean, I really don't care who the mayor designates.
Okay.
Because if it's I think it would be great if Councilman King was working with them, because we'd have a colleague working with these people that we already know, and I know how passionate he is about it and would do a fantastic job. Also, if the mayor found, some person from the community who is an expert in this and makes a whole bunch of money off of it and wants to do it for free for us, I don't want to bind the administration's hands from saying, go ahead and do this for us for free. I don't know. I'm fine with it. I wanted to at least have a conversation about the aspirational nature of this, that we're not making those commitments necessarily. I appreciate Mr. McConville that position, and to the mayor, you know, as long as if you don't feel like we are directing you to do something that you don't understand, you know, by creating this goal, then I think that's fine. We've talked about it. You understand it's a goal. We're not asking you to implement anything specific, and we'll come back for the larger, broader items that are within our purview, and the ones that you can do yourself, you can do, you know? I mean,
Yeah, I think we're in agreement that this is a goal and not a mandate, that this administration, hey, it's 2029 and we're still 5 points short. What are we going to do? You know, we're going to stop driving police cars in the city and put them all on bikes, even in January. No, we're not going to do that. So.
That university from 2010 to 2019 has reduced by 17%. I agree we need to understand that metric better. PCFO will be able to help us with that. But what that is telling us is that we're well on our way to reaching that 30% goal. I've also had that 30% goal is fairly modest. I know in Cleveland Heights resolution that they passed, they went with 30% based off of 2021 levels. So that, you know, they were starting from square one there. So I just wanted to state that these are very, very modest reduction goals. Secondly, I just wanted to say that in section 6, it does say that that the city will work to facilitate involvement from community members.
Can you speak into a little louder?
Sure.
You've competition now.
Section 6 says that you know, the city should facilitate involvement with community members in an equitable way, and basically to involve as many people as possible to get involvement and input from as many people as possible within the city, so that, you know, residents feel like they're involved in this effort.
I hope that we'll be more public.
Yes.
I hope that we'll be able to publicly hear the residents' voices, so we can all benefit
Absolutely.
from their expertise, creative ideas, and aspirations.
We will do that.
And I would just ask, you know, to the Vice Mayor, if you could make an invitation, or Mayor, if you could make an invitation quarterly to the group to report what they're doing, a progress report and an update. I'd really appreciate hearing that on a quarterly basis as well. Just so we have an understanding of what's happening. I've expressed to Councilman King, and, you know, one of the things that sometimes we don't do well at is kind of a progress report around some of the great work that's being done. And I'd like to hear this rather than at the end of a year, you know, hey, here's this policy, here's this plan, here's what we're working on, or here it is, here's the product, and not having heard that along the way. So I think it would be really helpful towards working together towards that goal.
Okay. Well, when we plan to meet with them soon after we pass this resolution, we will pass that along, and you know, I want to make sure that their efforts are focused on, you know, our efforts are focused on the work and not just the reporting. But I also completely agree that if you do good things but nobody knows about it, well, you're not doing the complete job. You want people to know about the progress you're making, and that is something that we are committed to. And whether it's through quarterly appearances or periodic appearances or what have you, we'll work that out.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. So, is there a motion to approve this resolution?
On emergency.
So moved.
Yes, on emergency.
So moved on emergency.
So moved on emergency by Mr. King. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Gould. Any further discussion on the motion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll first on the suspension of the rules?
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Lakeville?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, and then on the main motion?
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Lakeville?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, by a 6-0 vote, this does pass. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. King, for your diligence, and to Mrs. Weiss and Mr. Gould as well for your input with Mr. King on this, and Mr. McConville. Next is item J, ordinance 2022-46, authorizing all actions necessary to accept Northeast Ohio Public Energy Council NOPEC 2022 Energized Community Grant and declaring an emergency. Mr. Schaefer, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. This grant is a grant that NOPEC affords to member communities to undertake energy-efficient initiatives. This acceptance is just the first step as an initial part of the process to authorize it through council, as well as fill out a community profile. The projects and sort of things that we can utilize the grant for does not need to be determined right now, but communities tend to use it for things like LED lighting at city complexes, energy efficient equipment, facilities work. You can use it for electric vehicles now, things like that. So the grant amount that we would receive this year would be $28,394. And again, this is just to authorize acceptance, and then that money would be available to the city for energy efficient projects.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Mrs. Sachs.
Thank you, Mayor Brennan. Mr. Schaefer, so when we applied for the grant, we didn't have to specify what it would be used for?
No, so NOPEC proactively gives or offers the grant to communities that are members of the NOPEC consortium and gives them a set amount based on, I'm not sure how that's calculated, but you have it available after you get this initial acceptance to be able to then fill out an application later to say we're going to use it for X, Y.
That's wonderful. Have we ever done this before?
I think we've had it in years past, I think last year, but I believe we still have those funds available to us, because you can escrow them for a certain amount of time. So we could, in theory, combine these funds with last year's funds, for example, to undertake a larger project.
Nice. Do you recall what we used it for?
I don't believe we've used at least last year's. I don't know, before. This is my first year working with this.
Do you recall what we used it for?
Mr. Kennedy, do you recall some of the previous uses of NOPEC grants? I know Mr. Bicorni would have this information. Okay. He is on vacation and isn't here this evening, but he has typically worked with us in identifying projects around City Hall and in the community that this particular grant is helpful for. Now, as Mr. Schaefer indicated, for reasons that NOPEC has, we need to, in order to preserve the money for us, we need to accept this month the funds, and then they're escrowed, and then we have additional time to determine what we want to do with them. It is a compliance aspect that NOPEC puts into its grants. They offer these grants to all of their NOPEC communities, but in order to ensure that money is not just sitting there unused in perpetuity, they do expect municipalities to report in from time to time to say, yes, we are interested in the money, please go ahead and keep escrowing it. And then they give us a date by which that has to be done, which is the end of this month. So the idea here is we let NOPEC know that, yes, in fact, University Heights is interested in taking them up on their grant for something that falls in within the categories of things they'll consider. Then they keep that money on account for us. If we didn't respond, then they could use that money for somebody else who does respond.
That's fascinating. Are there different levels of grants, or it's just whatever they assign?
Yeah, I'm not sure, and Mayor, I don't know if you can speak to this further, but I believe it has to do with the size of the community and the number of customers and whatnot.
Yes.
Yeah, I would. It's not use it or lose it, obviously, but I would assume we have to use it in order to be eligible for repeated funding also. And I wonder if with the facilities assessment and such, if there are other grant opportunities through NOPEC that are of a larger scale, if we can show good stewardship and usage of their funds. So just something to keep in mind here and now, and then the larger picture.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't believe that's the case, but we can look into it.
Okay.
Okay, Mrs. Weiss.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I was just wondering, Mr. Kennedy, how much did we receive the last time we were awarded this?
I think it was the same amount. I think it was $25,000, and it was escrowed. It might have been a number very close.
So we only have 1 year's of $25,000 in escrow right now. So potentially we can have $50,000 in escrow.
I believe that's correct. We were, I think, as part of the proposal to escrow the money last year, we proposed a long-term solution to a generator problem that we have here.
Yes.
So I mean, I would just suggest that, hopefully we'll be awarded this since we're applying for it, and now we're going to have $50,000. It should really go to committee with the service director present to tell us what are the needs of the city.
Perhaps. I think the generator is something that we have discussed with NOPEC as something that needs attention, that, ought not wait for new municipal facilities to be constructed before we address.
Oh, no, for sure. I mean, an immediate need, not anything with facilities.
Yeah.
But I would think since a substantial grant, other grants, like let's say in police and fire, it goes to safety committee. I think this is probably something that maybe should go to service or even building. I don't know. It depends what the administration feels that they want to use the grant for.
Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, certainly any grant that we would apply for, we're not going to be able to accept without council approval. So making sure there's council buy-in on what we would like to do would be a good step in this process.
Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Gould?
So one of the concerns that I have is that usually there's an application and then an acceptance portion, which is what Mr. McConville in the past has described as the check that we have on some of the ways that the grant dollars are spent. And in this, we are immediately moving to acceptance without ever having applied. And I understand that's just a technicality of the way this works, it sounds like. But, this ordinance makes reference to a document that at least I haven't seen. Is there a grant agreement somewhere did you receive that, Kelly? So, Section 1 says that City Council's received a grant agreement and that we're authorizing the mayor to enter into something substantially similar to that which we've received. And so I just don't understand, the first whereas, the City of University Heights wishes to enter into a grant agreement with NOPEC Incorporated in substantially the form presented to this council, and that hasn't happened. Do you have that grant agreement?
Not here, not on me.
But you have the grant agreement?
I believe it's in the portal.
Yeah,
the application portal.
Okay.
It's an electronic, basically, yes, we're the City of University Heights, and yes, we accept the money. It's fairly perfunctory, but it's crucial to preserve the funds. It's not, I don't believe this is an extensive document.
I just think it's not true. We just haven't seen the document, so. Yes, I'll leave the floor.
I don't know if you still have the floor.
No, please, take it.
Well, so if we get
Mayor,
the
sorry.
money, whatever,
I can't hear you.
Is that better?
That's better.
Glad you want to hear me. So the process is that we are invited to really apply for X amount of dollars, right? We have the green light to go ahead and apply, for $25,000 for the project of our choice that meets their requirements. Do I understand that correctly?
More or less, yeah.
So last year, we got $25,000. What did we agree to?
Just that we were accepting the money that we could then use.
And they give it to you before you even say
Right,
what you're
because
going to
they-
use it for? I got to find those grants.
They don't give it to you, it's sent in escrow
It's-
with
right.
the organization.
It's not
We are not in
current.
possession of the money.
Okay, thank you.
But it's in escrow designated for University Heights.
I understand.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to overthink this. This is usually a 120-second discussion. Free money is coming. We just need to let them know that, yes, we want it, and we'll talk more later about what we can do with it.
I think perhaps council's looking for clarification that they're going to have the opportunity to accept the grant dollars at the time that the particular grant is applied for and approved. Isn't that your concern?
Yes. And also that there's things, it says that things have happened that haven't happened. So it is concerning to me that we would approve an ordinance that says that we've received something to review that we haven't seen and that we're authorizing the mayor to enter into something substantially similar to what we've received and we haven't. And then I guess the other question I had is, how is the expenditure done with this grant? What's the process for that?
I don't know if Mr. Kennedy knows more of the specifics on that.
I believe, I'm trying to find it here in some of the last year documents. I believe it is a reimbursable grant.
A what?
Reimbursable grant, so we have to pay for the service, provide evidence it was completed, provide the appropriate receipts, and then we would get the money.
So in that case, you're absolutely necessary to approve the initial expenditures.
Is there a motion to adopt the ordinance on emergency?
So moved on emergency.
Okay, a motion to adopt on emergency by Mr. Cooney. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Weiss. Any further discussion? Mrs. Thomas, will you take the roll first on suspension of the rules?
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankenfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, and then on the main motion.
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Blankenfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Weiss?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Nay.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Okay, I'll remind the body that items K and L have been tabled, and now we move to items N through T, which by previous motion earlier this evening will be taken together. Mr. McConville, I should just go ahead and read all of these, correct? At this time? Okay, so next up are items N through T, which read as follows. Ordinance 2022-34, amending codified ordinance chapter 1060 entitled Sidewalks, Driveways, and Tree Lawns, and declaring an emergency, on passage and emergency. Item N is ordinance 2022-35, amending codified ordinance chapter 1280 entitled Supplemental Regulations and declaring an emergency, on passage and emergency. Item O, ordinance 2022-36, amending codified ordinance chapter 1420 entitled Administrative Procedures, General Code Penalty, and declaring an emergency, on passage and emergency. Item P is ordinance 2022-37, amending codified ordinance chapter 1452 entitled Garbage Disposals, and declaring an emergency, on passage and emergency. Item Q, as amended, is ordinance 2022-38, amending codified ordinance chapter 1456 entitled Moving of Building and Structures, and declaring an emergency, on passage and emergency. Item R is ordinance 2022-39, amending codified ordinance chapter 1470 entitled Purpose and Scope, and declaring an emergency, on passage and emergency. Item S is ordinance 2022-40, amending codified ordinance chapter 1472 entitled Definitions, and declaring an emergency, on passage and emergency. Item T is ordinance 2022-41, amending codified ordinance chapter 1474 entitled Enforcement and declaring an emergency on passage and emergency. Mr. McDonald, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. These ordinances, again, are ordinances that come out of the Building and Housing Committee and are intended to make our codified ordinances and building code provisions consistent across all the chapters in terms of making correct references to the building engineering and inspection department and to the building commission, and adding references to the Housing and Community Development Department and the Housing and Community Development, Housing and Community Development Director, so that authorities granted within those chapters of ordinances are exercised both by the building commissioner and the Housing and Community Development Director.
Okay, very good. Mrs. Blankenfeld, you're the sponsor of these pieces of legislation. Anything you would care to add at this time? Okay, we have a motion by Mrs. Blankenfeld on emergency to adopt items M through T. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, second by Mrs. Sachs. So the motion is by Mrs. Blankenfeld, second by Mrs. Sachs. Any discussion on the motion? Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll first on the suspension of the rules?
Mrs. Sachs? Aye. Mrs. Lakeville? Aye. Mrs. Wise? Aye. Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Mooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, and then on the main motion.
Mrs. Sachs? Aye. Mrs. Lakeville? Aye. Mrs. Wise? Aye. Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Mooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
A very good motion carries, and items M through T are approved. Next is item U, ordinance 2022-42, amending codified ordinance chapter 1475 entitled Notice of Foreclosure and Registration of Vacant Buildings or Structures and declaring an emergency on passage and emergency. This is going from your sponsor. I know there's some changes. Would you like to just go to Mr. McConville? Very good. Mr. McConville, you have the floor. Thank you.
This ordinance too came out of the Building and Housing Committee and makes the same changes to references as the previous set of ordinances, but also contains one substantive change, which is to clarify that the penalty for violation of the ordinance as set forth in 1475-99 is a first-degree misdemeanor.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Any discussion on this item? Is there a motion to approve on emergency?
I'll make that motion to
There's a motion to approve on emergency by Mrs. Blankenfeld. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Second by Mr. King. Any discussion on the motion? Then we will take two votes. The first being on the suspension of rules. Mrs. Thomas?
Mrs. Sachs? Aye. Mrs. Blake?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
And on the main motion.
Mrs. Sachs? Aye. Mrs. Lakeville? Aye. Mrs. Wise? Aye. Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Mooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
A very good motion carries. Next is item V, ordinance 2022-43, amending codified ordinance chapter 1478 entitled Basic Standards for Residential Occupancy and declaring an emergency on passage and emergency. Mr. McConville.
This too came out of Building and Housing, makes the same changes to the various references. Also contains a substantive change to 1478.10, indicating that non-metallic pipe may be used both for new construction and for any remedial work. The current ordinance as it exists limits the use of non-metallic pipe to new construction.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Are there any questions? And if not, is there a motion to approve on emergency? Okay, motion by Mrs. Blankenfeld on emergency. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Weiss. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Mrs. Thomas, we'll take two votes again. First on the suspension of the rules.
Mrs. Sachs. Aye. Mrs. Langfeld. Aye. Mrs. Wise. Aye. Mr. Gould. Aye. Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
And on the main motion?
Mrs. Sachs. Aye. Mrs. Langfeld. Aye. Mrs. Wise. Aye. Mr. Gould.
Aye.
Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Motion carries. Next is item W, ordinance 2023-44, amending codified ordinance chapter 1484 entitled Child Daycare Homes in a U1 and U2 district and declaring an emergency on passage of emergency. Mr. McConnell.
This is the last of the ordinances that came out of building and housing, also making all the changes to the department head references, and has a substantive change in 1484.05 where we are eliminating a sentence that reads handgun owners are required to register with the city. Not requiring that to state law regarding firearms, and so amending 1484.05 to reflect current status of state law.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. McConnell. Mrs. Whitehall.
I just wanted to acknowledge all of the hard work and time that this has taken. There's a number of pieces here and bringing things current, both in language and substance was much appreciated. Hard work was in content and correct administration.
And I'm sure that there are members of Mr. McConnell's firm that assisted Mr. McConnell on this as well.
Yeah, Mr. Cicero.
And well, that also includes Mr. Cicero.
Yeah, Mr. Cicero. Did notice that in
I'm sure he knows he was included.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Whitehall. Is there a motion to approve on emergency? Okay, a motion by Mrs. Kornfeld on emergency. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. Weiss. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll take two votes. Mrs. Thomas, will you take the roll first on suspension of the rules?
Mrs. Sachs. Aye. Mrs. Langfeld. Aye. Mrs. Wise. Aye. Mr. Gould. Aye. Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye. And on the main motion?
Mrs. Sachs. Aye. Mrs. Langfeld. Aye. Mrs. Wise. Aye. Mr. Gould. Mr. Cooney.
Aye.
Mr. King.
Aye. Okay, very good. Motion carried. Next is item X, ordinance 2022-47, enacting codified ordinance section 698.08 entitled forfeiture and declaring an emergency. This is on emergency. Mr. Gould, you're the sponsor of this legislation. Would you like the floor?
This was brought to the Safety Committee at the beginning of this month by Mr. Cicero, and the committee unanimously voted to pass the version that would be put on by, or prepared by Mr. McConnell and Mr. Cicero to this committee, or this full body. There was a change in state law that changed, as Mr. McConnell mentioned just a moment ago, the requirements for CCW holders, specifically their training and other items. However, there is a provision in state law that had not been implemented by us previously, which allows for the forfeiture of firearms for certain violations. So this would basically, inside of our firearms and our explosives chapter, would add a reference to that chapter from the penalties chapter of our criminal code. And if you, for instance, have improperly handling a firearm in a vehicle, the prosecutor is directed to call for the forfeiture of that weapon, and the judge is required to forfeit that weapon. In any instance when we are requiring the forfeiture of, or we're requiring a jurist to do something, as a courtesy, I'd like to reach out to that jurist. Mr. Cicero and I met with Judge Keller last Monday afternoon. She is in complete agreement and support of this provision if passed by this body. So with that, I would like to ask for passage.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Gould. Simply add that I support this effort, and I'm happy to see it move forward thanks to the work of Mr. Gould and of our prosecutor, Mr. Cicero. So thank you again to Mr. Cicero.
I'll just add anecdotally that the law department is taking a look at our current codified ordinances that relate to firearms and handguns, and it is likely that you will see additional legislation over the summer that causes those particular chapters to be consistent with the rules and stuff like that.
Very good, thank you, Mr. Moore. All right, is there a motion to approve ordinance 2022-47 on emergency? Motion by Mr. Gould on emergency, is there a second?
We all want a second.
And I'm going to take Mr. King's second on this one. And I know everybody will get their opportunity to support this in just a moment. So, is there any discussion? We will take 2 votes. The first on the suspension of the rules. Mrs. Thomas.
Mrs. Sacks? Aye. Mrs. Whitfield? Aye. Mrs. Wise? Aye. Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Moody?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye. Very good. And on the main motion.
Mrs. Sacks? Aye. Mrs. Whitfield? Aye. Mrs. Wise? Aye. Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Moody?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye. Very good. I'll be delighted to sign this into law on my next opportunity. Thank you very much, Council. Next is item Y, motion to enter executive session for the purpose of discussing legal proceedings, personnel and real estate matters. I understand that there's been a request for an update on some not personnel, but rather legal proceedings and real estate matters. So we'll take a motion by Mrs. Blainfeld, and is there a second? I don't think it will take long. I know that there's 3 things you would like to cover. I think we can do it expeditiously. Is there a second on the motion on executive session? A second. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. We have a motion and a second. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sacks? Aye. Mrs. Whitfield? Aye. Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Moody?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye. Okay, that carries. We will go into executive session at the conclusion of the regular portion of the meeting. We will now turn to reports and communications from the directors of the various departments, and we will start with finance. Mr. Kennedy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you to everyone for approving the tax budget and also the professional service agreement with Columbus Nelson. We hope it will be greatly appreciated. Balance this week, we're going to finish up audit work that needs to be completed. We hope we have our GAAP financial statements filed with the Auditor of the State's Office on June 30th. The next process is for a couple of weeks, the field auditors will return after those financial statements are completed and finish up their review of financial information. So I'm hoping to have them report sometime in July. That. Mayor and I will be on a conference call tomorrow with the county to go over the tax assessment review council board hearing that's for 2022. And that's where we'll go before a group of county employees to justify the TIF that related to Peterson Square. And we'll be having that review soon. With that, and if a list of things that to various folks here tonight, they will get to tomorrow as well. Interesting.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Are there any questions for Mr. Kennedy? Seeing none, we will move on to Director of Law, Mr. McConville.
I'll deliver my report in executive session here.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. McConville. Next is Public Safety Police. Chief Rogers has been excused from tonight's meeting and has no report. Public Safety Fire, Chief Burke.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, I just wanted this week we'll be conducting regional fire training here at Wiley. Starting today, we'll go through Thursday, the morning session, afternoon session, coming off 55 days for the region each session each day. So, something to do, we'll all be outside, helping
Okay, very good. Thank you, Chief Burke. Any questions for Chief Burke? Griffin?
Is the temperature inside part of the simulation to ensure that we all feel that we are going to burn?
Hydration. Very good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gould. Next is service. Mr. Picorni has been excused from this meeting as he's on vacation. There is no report. Next then is building. And for those of you who have not met him, I'd like to introduce you to Rick Laconte, who is our chief building official. He is here to give a report. You have the floor, Mr. Laconte.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Madam Council President. Good evening, Council people. As Mayor said, Rick Laconte, I have been assigned by April, the mayor, to be the building official, filling the vacancy. My friend Mike, who is continuing physical illness, reference, hired significant heights, building official for the last 5 years, last October. And we have now building that said, I also realize that there is a building council in the mayor different than a contract from city building. So I was in council continuing that I will be at all subsequent meetings. That said, the report for the building department is Russ. Since my tenure, we have done issued 324 simple permits. We've had 187 new contract registrations, and there's been over 51 separate building permits issued in the last few months. In addition, we've had 10 large projects at various stages ongoing, 4 on the John Carroll. To that end, we issued time-limited CAO for protocol already, but a few outside issues for students and adults. There's 3 more dormitories that are being worked on, in addition to the field house and subsequent building department issues there. Also, we started the work on the bus depot, and Heights Beverage is now going through plan review for the second time as is Lisa Bobo, Body College, School, Companies. That concludes my report. Any questions from council?
Yes, thank you, Mr. LaConte. Are there any questions for Mr. LaConte? There will be other opportunities to ask questions, so that is more than okay. Mr. LaConte, thank you for being here. I would like to add for the record, just for everyone's edification, that Mr. LaConte will be, on a go-forward basis, attending our DZA and ARD meetings at my request. And I know that is a popular request among the members of those bodies and among this body. So thank you, Mr. LaConte, for your service to our city, and look forward to our continued work together.
Thank you very much. Good evening, council.
Oh, yes, Mr. Gould.
I just know that I think the minimum contract, Mr. LaConte goes for $100 so for purposes of our meetings, if there's a report that he has, it's a written form, perhaps you can submit that to the body for any questions or items related to it. I just have to sit back in the room for 2 or 3 hours and bill us to give a oral report without any questions. It's not, arguably not the best use of taxpayer funds. So I just
I understand. I also know that there were complaints at the previous council meeting by certain council members that they had never even met Mr. LaConte, and I took that to heart. Wanted to make sure he was here this evening so that everybody could put a face to the name and actually meet the man. So he is.
So important.
But I concur.
Going forward, I know he's going to be at these other meetings regularly. I don't know if ours has to go on.
Well, yes, and I appreciate that, because there will be from time to time, for example, the special meeting that I hope to have on July 13th. We may very well want Mr. LaConte at that meeting, because it will relate to planning commission items that he will have special knowledge about, and unique knowledge about, and that he can provide. But thank you, Mr. Gould, for acknowledging that we may not want to have him sit through every one of these meetings, because they can be long. This was a longer one so far, and I'm I'm sure that Mr. LaPonte won't mind having to attend each and every one of them. I can tell that I'm going to have to twist his arm very hard later to convince him why he doesn't have to do that.
That's a fiscally responsible. I'm seldom on my personal cell is online. Also, feel free to call me at any time for any questions. Prior to or after the meeting, I agree with you sit back here is pretty absorbing.
What is it now?
I don't think you.
We're moving to the top of the agenda next time.
Nobody said you were cheating, Mr. LaPonte. Okay, very good, thank you. Next is Housing and Community Development, Mr. Engelbrecht.
Mayor has no report tonight.
No report, thank you. And once again, good work on June 10th.
Thank you.
Okay, City Engineer, Mr. Cheney had a conflict this evening, being a Tuesday, and he was excused from this meeting, and he has no report. Well, you know, there were a few items I could probably share on his behalf. The Cedar Road project, they have finished the paving as of Friday on the east end of the project. They're going to be doing the striping on that part tomorrow. Once the striping is done, those lanes will reopen. The eastern part, or rather the western part of the project, they are ready to go, but we've asked them to wait until the eastern part of the project, those lanes are reopened, before they close those lanes and begin work there, so that we don't have two separate work areas in the city, making it that much harder to go down Cedar Road. They have applied by our request that they do that. So we anticipate that the western phase will begin next week. The Trainmore Waterline project, the last part of the pipe was installed on Friday. The Dominion on-roll gas project, they are currently on Meadowbrook, approaching Edgerton. And if Mr. Cheney were here, that would basically be the conclusion of his report. So, thank you. Next is Communications and Civic Engagement. Mr. Cook. No report. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cook. Next then is Economic Development. Mrs. Drucker was excused this evening to attend the wake, and she has no report. That then brings us to the standing committees of council and the taking of action thereon. We start with building and housing. Mrs. Weinberg.
Thank you, Mayor. There are 3 items that were considered by the Building and Housing Committee this evening. Those have been tabled and are with the law department for update and review. Those will come back to council either at a special meeting over the summer or the first meeting in September.
Very good. Thank you, Mrs. Blanco. Community outreach, Mr. King. A report. Thank you, Mr. King. Economic development, Mr. Roth is not here. Does anybody have a report on his behalf? Mrs. Thomas.
Yes, Mr. Roth asked me to give his report.
Yeah. Could you speak into the microphone to the screen?
He will have his economic committee meeting on July 6th. I just sent an email out and invite everybody. The agenda items are as follows: the formation of a zoning steering committee, discussion of the zoning consultant's timeline, and that's all we have for the agenda.
Okay.
And that means
Did you say 6 o'clock? Well, we can clarify that with the notice. But July 6th, that evening, so noted.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. Okay, so 7 o'clock. Will that be here or at the annex, or we get you done?
OPT was that the places to be determined because they're probably good, especially.
The air has generally worked at the annex, if not the law firm. Okay, very good. Thank you, Mrs. Thomas. Finance, Mrs. West.
Very
report, Mayor.
Thank you, Mrs. West. Recreation, Mr. Freeman. No report, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Boone. Safety, Mr. Booth.
Thank you. As the law director mentioned, I have asked him and his assistant, the prosecutor, to prepare, to organize our criminal code into discrete sections. I propose that we organize them into crimes against people, crimes against peace, crimes against property, and vice and regulatory crimes. The criminal ordinance review subcommittee, the safety committee, is comprised of you, Mayor, the police chief, Mr. Cicero, Terry Gilman, and me. I propose that we have 5 meetings over the summer as soon as this organization has been created and the ordinances for us to review at approximately an hour and 30 minutes each. 30 minutes to discuss the changes from the last meeting, and an hour to discuss the section at hand. My goal is to have this presented to the safety committee for their final review on October 5th. So, Mr. McConville, if you would please have that list or that organization by ordinance number and title to me in the next 2 weeks or so, that would be very helpful so we can continue to work over this.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Gould. Service and Utilities, Mrs. Singh.
Thank you, Mayor Brennan. The next Service and Utilities Committee meeting will be scheduled after the survey results are in hand, unless something urgent arises that requires an emergency session. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mrs. White. Committee of the Whole, Mrs. White.
No report.
Thank you, Mrs. White. Are there any reports of special committees and taking of action thereon? Seeing none, is there any unfinished or miscellaneous business? Seeing none, we will then proceed to the executive session that we previously moved to enter for both legal and real estate matters. I do not anticipate any action being taken on the record following that executive session other than a motion to adjourn. So while you are welcome to stay, I don't believe that there will be anything that you will be missing if you would care to depart. So we will be back in a few minutes. We do intend to have this not take too long, and have a good summer. See you at the concerts, and anticipate that we'll see you also in numerous meetings, and hopefully we'll be back not only for a July 13th special meeting, but next Wednesday in Cleveland Heights at 6:30 for the joint meeting of governments and boards. So we will now retire to have an executive session. Thank you.
Yeah, why don't we do that? For the July, I propose the July 13th special meeting. Mrs. Weiss just told me that she will not be able to attend. She will be. Let's go back. Oh, yeah, let's go back.
Vote on to adjourn the general session?
Sure.
Is there a motion to adjourn the regular session?
Motion. Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Gould, second by Mr. Cooney. Is that what happens? Or the other way around? Whichever it was. We'll go with that. Motion by Mr. Gould, second by Mr. Cooney to return to regular session. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sacks? Aye. Mrs. Blankville?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Gould?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye. Okay, very good. We're back in regular session. Before we accept the motion to adjourn, we do have a bit of miscellaneous business, and that's about the scheduling of a special meeting in July following the next July 7th Planning Commission meeting. I had proffered the 13th of July as a date that would work for us administratively. I understand that Mrs. Weiss is not available. We're going to need 5 people. I want to know if you can tell us now if we would have 5 people who can appear for a July 13th special meeting.
Yeah, I would be unavailable that day.
You're unavailable, okay. So then at best there will be 4 plus, we don't know about John Rock yet.
I expect to be.
You expect to be available?
I expect to be.
Okay. So if Mr. Rock can do it, then we could do it on the 13th. We would be doing it with the narrowest number for a special meeting. It seemed to me there was a reason we couldn't do it on the 12th. I don't remember what the reason was. That's right. Right. So yes, Mr. McConville wasn't available on the 12th or the 14th. And I think there was some reason that the 11th wasn't good, though I don't remember why.
What time is it on for, please?
It will probably be 7 or 6:30. We didn't really set a time.
Mayor, I actually may be available on the 13th.
On the 13th?
Oh, there's a possibility it could be available.
Oh, okay, good. All right. I don't remember why we didn't look at the 11th. Now, we talked about it at our staff meeting this morning. If it's something we can overcome administratively, is the 11th, how does everybody look on the 11th? You're gone that whole week, so that doesn't change you then, okay? You're unavailable the 11th, okay, so already we're looking.
Tentatively, I'm not.
Okay, so 13th is already looking better than the 11th, okay. We just want to keep the process moving. They'll be going to the planning commission. I will be taking vacation.
Nope.
I know. I'll be taking vacation from the 15th through and back on the 25th. And I really wanted to get this done before I left town.
Is it a long meeting? It could be after planning? It's only one thing on the planning?
I think, talking with Mrs. Thomas, there's some notice issues involved. We won't know exactly what planning commission has decided in order to really craft the agenda, which is why we didn't even consider doing it like a midday on Friday, because of the same reason. Kelly, unless you...
I mean, you could post it Thursday and then have to pull it if we cancel.
And the other thing that we need to do is accept a bid on the Washington Saybrook Silsby project. But I don't believe that'll take long. What could take long would be this, whatever comes from planning commission, depending on what is presented, what is filed, what is presented, what is recommended for approval.
Would you want John Sherrill here too for that, for council meeting?
Probably they would want to be here. It'll behoove them to, get their cookies over here whenever we schedule our meeting. So you could make a meeting on the 8th, Friday the 8th, if it was early in the day. I suppose because it is close to solstice here. So. Okay.
Send out a doodle.
Doodles are good for this.
Yeah, I know that it was going to be
difficult and burdensome for Mrs. Thomas to try to flip that around, and we'll have to be a little creative on the agenda because we won't actually know by the agenda filing deadline, posting deadline, what exactly the planning commission's approved. But I suppose we could probably take up generally, items that were recommended by planning commission, and then we can specify them at the meeting after planning commission's met.
Mr. Rock can make it on the 13th, then you have your 5, so.
Well, and Mr. Meany may also.
Yeah, the 13th may be your best option.
Yeah. Okay, well then, let's check with Mr. Rock. I think 13th is probably best if we can get the quorum. Okay, very good. All right, that does give us the guidance we need to move forward. We'll check with John and get something set so that we can block it on the calendar. All right, thank you, Mrs. Weiss, thank you, everybody. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes, please, I'll move.
Motion to adjourn by Mrs. Linville, second by Mr. King. Mrs. Thomas, will you call the roll?
Mrs. Sacks?
Aye.
Mrs. Linville?
Aye.
Mrs. Wise?
Aye.
Mr. Cooney?
Aye.
Mr. King?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.